So good morning, everybody. My name is Dan Kraft, and on behalf of everybody at Forum Global and all of our event partners, I'd like to offer a very warm welcome to you all, both here in Bangkok and also for those joining us online, to the 8th Annual Asia-Pacific Spectrum Management Conference. So after more than 2 years and 12 editions of different regional events from the Global Spectrum Series taking place entirely virtually, and that includes 2 editions of this Asia-Pacific Conference, it's absolutely fantastic to finally have the chance to be back here in person and to be able to welcome some of you here to Bangkok. It's great to see you all, and I'm really looking forward to catching up with everyone properly over the course of the next 2 days. And I would like, of course, as well, to extend a very warm welcome to all of those of you joining us online. There's more than 600 people we have registered to participate at the event online, and we're also delighted to have all of you with us, and we're really looking forward to hopefully connecting with you virtually during the event, and also to hearing from you via the various interactive tools that we have available for you to participate in the discussions. And of course, for all of those of you who are online, we do very much hope to be able to see you in person very soon too. So in a second, it's going to be my honor to officially open the conference and to get things going with our opening ceremony. But before we do that, there are a few things I just wanted to mention on the practical side. So first of all, I would like to say a big thank you to all of our sponsor and partner organizations for the support of this event. You'll see their logos on the screen in front of you now, and also for everyone here in the room, you can see the logos on the banner behind me here. We really do appreciate the support of each and every one of these organizations. Without you, the event is not possible, so thank you all so much. Next up, for those of you joining us online, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the virtual event platform that we're using and provide a little bit of information on that. So the platform for this hybrid event works in exactly the same way as it has been doing for the fully virtual events that we've been having over the last couple of years. So as well as being able to follow all the sessions and listen to the speakers who are taking part both here in Bangkok and also remotely, you will also be able to access the various interactive features of the platform as well. So we have an area for you to use on the right-hand side of your screen to post questions and comments and things like that. So please do listen to the discussions. And if you have any questions that you want to pose during the panel discussions that take place, then please do that using the area on the right-hand side of your screen. You can also view the list of participants in that area there. And you can also send then individual one-to-one messages and even arrange video meetings using that session there, using that area there. On the right-hand side of your screen, you will find our on-demand area. So you will see there a number of virtual exhibition stands that are being hosted by some of our partners, and also a number of showcase sessions that are taking place. So again, on the screen here now, you can see the showcase sessions that we have taking place. So all of these sessions are available on demand, so are available for you to watch where at your convenience throughout the 2 days. And they're going to be looking at a bit more detail and some of the key areas that we're focusing on during the actual plenary sessions themselves. So you can see the partners who are hosting the showcase sessions here and the titles of those individual showcase sessions here. So please do make sure you check them out during the time at the event. For those of you here in person, you will have received a sheet, a bit like that, which has all the QR codes and links. So you can download all of the conference proceedings and things using that, and the bottom link there is the one that, again, enables you to access those showcase sessions and be able to follow those at your convenience. One thing to mention again for all of you here, for asking questions, we invite you to either choose to ask questions in the traditional way by raising your hand, or again, using the middle link on the sheet that you have. You can actually do that using the Q&A platform online as well. So whichever one you feel more comfortable using. So it's all a little bit more complicated than a fully virtual or a fully in-person event, but hopefully everything makes sense. And if anyone has any questions at all, then please, for those of you here, feel free to speak to myself or any member of the team. For those of you following online, please put a message in the chat, and we have people monitoring that who'll be able to assist with any questions that you have. Next, to mention Wi-Fi here in the venue. So there is Wi-Fi available. Hopefully those of you who are here have found that already, but if you have not, you can see the little signs on the tables in front of you. So you need to log on to the network Marriott Bonvoy, and the password is Ballroom A. So that should be able to then get you online. I also wanted to mention our hashtag that we have available for the event. So the hashtag that we have and we're using is hashtag AsiaSpectrum. So anyone who is posting any messages on Twitter or on social media about the event, please do use that. And you can also use that hashtag to see what else is being said about the event as well. Next, presentations and also the recordings that we have available. So all of the sessions that are taking place will be recorded. And you will have the option to watch those back afterwards. And in addition, all of the presentations that are being made, you'll have copies of those to download afterwards as well. So for those of you online, you'll be able to see a link to that in the reception area on the main platform. For those of you who are here, you can use that using the Access to Conference Materials link at the top of your information sheet that you have here. And finally, everybody here, I'd like to invite you all to join us at the end of the day today for a networking reception that we have taking place, which will be taking place just outside the main room. So immediately following the end of the proceedings today, we will have that networking reception. So very much hope you're all able to stay and join us for a few drinks after the end of the proceedings today. So without further ado, it's now time for me to officially open the conference and start with our opening ceremony for the event. Mr. Masanori Kondo, Secretary General of the Asia-Pacific Telecommunity. Mr. Mario Manovitz, Director of the Radio Communications Bureau at the ITU. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored guests. Once again, it gives me great pleasure to issue a very warm welcome to you all to this 8th annual Asia-Pacific Spectrum Management Conference. And we're honored to have you all here with us here for this opening ceremony. So to kick things off for the opening ceremony and for the conference itself, it's my great honor to invite to the stage Masanori Kondo, Secretary General of the Asia-Pacific Telecommunity. Kondo-san, it's an honor to once again have you with us to participate in this opening ceremony. We really enjoy a long-standing relationship with APT when it comes to this conference, and the support and guidance that you and the team, along with Parvez, with Jongbong and the others, provide us is a big part of the success of the event, and we really do appreciate that. And I very much look forward to hearing your thoughts now on the key topics and spectrum priorities for the region. So Kondo-san, the floor is yours.
So Mr. Dan Kraft, Event Manager, Forum Global. Mr. Mario Manovitz, Director, Radio Communication Bureau, International Telecommunication Union, ITU. Mrs. Atsuko Okuda, Regional Director, IT Regional Office, Asia Pacific Region, all participants. Good morning. It is my great pleasure to say a few words on behalf of the Asia Pacific Telecommunity, APT, at the opening of this 8th Asia Pacific Spectrum Management Conference. APT has been one of the co-organizers of this spectrum management event over the past several years. And on behalf of APT, I would like to express our sincere appreciation to Forum Global for being the driving force of this initiative. During the pandemic, we observed that digital communication technology plays a vital role to maintain connectivity among people. We have seen an increase of data traffic to many folds, and a huge portion of data traffic relies on mobile networks. As a result, the spectrum has emerged as a key and vital resource to keep the wireless networks active. At the same time, the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed, to some extent, the digital divide in the Asia-Pacific region. APT emphasizes the importance of bridging the digital divide and enhancing the access and efficiency of digital infrastructure. Therefore, APT Strategic Plan articulates it as one of the strategic pillars of APT's activities. In this connection, managing the spectrum, which is a scarce resource, is a crucial policy and regulatory agenda. As APT, we also have several dedicated work programs to address spectrum management issues. APT Conference Preparatory Group for WRC, or APG, has been engaged in developing APT common proposals on WRC agenda items. AWG, which is APT Wireless Group, is the unique work program in the region to develop APT recommendations and reports on various aspects of radio communication technologies. Other policies and regulatory platforms, such as SATLC, South Asian Telecommunication Regulators Council, and Symposium on Spectrum Management, are to discuss the matters from the laws, economics, and social aspects of spectrum management. Last year, APT also launched a new initiative called APT Web Dialogue Series on Spectrum Management to respond to the need to learn something new or widen the knowledge on spectrum management-related issues. We just finished the second series successfully, which focused on the 6 GHz band, and we'll be launching another series from 19th May, focusing on Wi-Fi 6E access opportunities. So as such, spectrum management is always a hot and interesting topic. Distinguished participants, I have individual experiences of joining some of the events of Forum Global in the past as a panelist or as a moderator, and I enjoyed them very much because other speakers' insights and perspectives were quite fruitful to deepen my own view on the matters related to spectrum management. So as usual, this spectrum management conference this year will address important issues, including spectrum strategies to meet the connectivity requirements, the status of WRC-23 preparations, the continued evolution of 3.5 GHz range, potential evolution of 6 GHz band, spectrum licensing and planning in the region, and many other issues. I'm sure that you will get some takeaways from this year's event. I hope you enjoy these sessions. To conclude, I would like to express my sincere thanks and appreciation once again for Forum Global for organizing this event and its excellent arrangements. In addition, I'd like to thank ITU, all other partners, and all participants for your physical or virtual presence today. I hope that the deliberations during this conference will be fruitful and wish you all a successful event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kondo-san, and really do appreciate you, as I said, joining us and being here to open the conference in that way and to give us that overview of some of the priorities and some of the work that APT have coming up. And you definitely have a busy few months ahead of you, so we wish you all the best of luck with that. But thank you once again for everything. So next up, I would like to welcome to the stage virtually Mario Manovitz, Director of the Radio Communications Bureau at ITU. Mario, welcome. Really good to see you here. We really do appreciate you joining us in this way. As with APT, we enjoy a really long-standing relationship with ITU when it comes to this event, and as ever, we very much appreciate all of the support that you and the team there in Geneva, and also the regional team here in the Asia-Pacific do. I know this week is extremely busy for you. I know you have lots of meetings going on. I think you have the CTEL meeting in Mexico. You have a CPT meeting in Denmark. So you're being pulled in lots of different directions. So we really do appreciate, given that, even more so than ever, you taking the time to join us for the opening ceremony today. So yeah, Mario, I will pass the floor over to you, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts and maybe an update on the preparation for WRC 23. So welcome again, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dan. I would like to thank you and Forum Global for the invitation to participate in this opening ceremony of the Asia Pacific Spectrum Management Conference of this year. I'm really delighted to be here with all of you today. I'm sorry not to be able to be there in person, but as Dan mentioned, there are many conflicting meetings this week, and I had to make a choice. So I hope to be able to be in presence in person with you in the near future. I also want to acknowledge Kondo-san's kind words and the cooperation with APT that we always have that is very fruitful. So I have some slides for my presentation today. So let me go to them. So in my presentation, I will cover the WRC preparations that are taking place within the ITUR, I mean the study groups and working parties, recognizing that the success of the conference relies also on the process that takes place within national administrations of each one of you and regional groups like APT. The CPM is less than 1 year away, as you know, and currently the ITUR study groups are conducting sharing and compatibility studies and developing the CPM text that should present the description of the possible methods to satisfy the agenda items and the different views. So if we go to the next slide, as you know, the WRC 23 has several agenda items that go beyond fixed mobile and broadcasting issues. It includes aeronautical and maritime issues, science issues, and satellite issues. However, I will focus my presentation today on the agenda items that you will be discussing these days during these events. Next slide, please. This slide shows the frequency bands per region being considered under agenda items 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and 1.5 related to fixed, mobile, and broadcasting issues. For Asia Pacific or Region 3, we can see the two frequencies that will be studied within the ITUR. I will highlight the ongoing work of the study group on each of these topics, as I said. So next slide. Starting from agenda item 1.1, the conference will consider the protection of stations of the aeronautical and maritime mobile services from IMT stations in the 4800 to 4990 MHz band, and will review the power flux density criteria under footnote 5.441b. I note that within the list of administrations in this footnote, subject to the review of the W23, there are countries of this region, such as Cambodia, China, Laos, Korea, and Vietnam. Next slide. Within the ITUR, the work on this agenda item is being conducted by two responsible groups, two working parties, Working Party 5B and Working Party 5D. Working Party 5B is developing a revision to an existing recommendation with technical characteristics and protection criteria for systems operating in the aeronautical mobile service and maritime mobile service within the 4,400 and 4,990 megahertz frequency range. While Working Party 5D is working on a preliminary draft new report related to WRC 23 agenda item 1.1 and is also developing the preliminary draft CPM text for this agenda item. Next slide. Moving on to agenda item 1.2, which considers the identification of several bands for IMT, there is in fact only one frequency band that will be considered globally, and therefore considered in Region 3 for IMT, and this is the 7,025 to 7,125 megahertz band. As you know, there is much debate on the use of the upper and lower 6 gigahertz band for licensed and unlicensed services. Next slide. Within the ITUR, Working Party 5D is working on sharing and compatibility studies of IMT systems in all frequency bands listed under Resolution 245. For the 6 gigahertz band, specific attachments to the working document on sharing and compatibility studies of IMT are being developed for the incumbent services, namely for the fixed and fixed satellite services, as well as for space research service and space operations services. A similar approach is being taken in the 10 gigahertz band, where the incumbent services include Earth exploration satellite services, fixed services, and radio location services. Next slide, please. Sorry for this. Regarding the C-band, Agenda Item 1.2 will consider the identification of the band for IMT in Region 2, while Agenda Item 1.3 will consider the mobile allocation of the C-band in Region 1. In both cases, studies are not being done for Region 3. Next slide. Currently, Working Party 5A is working on a document towards a draft report for sharing and compatibility studies and on the draft CPM text. Next. Finally, Agenda Item 1.5 refers to the UHF band, considering, on the one hand, the expansion of mobile coverage and the favorable propagation of propagation characteristics in the frequency bands below 1 gigahertz, and on the other hand, the current and future use of the band for terrestrial television broadcasting services. Next. TG61 is the responsible group for this agenda item, and they are developing working documents on the spectrum use and spectrum needs of existing services, as well as sharing and compatibility studies in the band 470 to 694 megahertz and the preliminary draft CPM text. In short, this is the work that is being conducted within the ITUR for each of these agenda items. Next. Dear colleagues, I think that it's important that as we discuss the agenda items for WRC 23 and the identification of additional frequency bands for IMT, all countries consider as well the frequency bands that have already been identified globally for IMT in previous WRCs. In the graph in this slide, you can see a comparison between the number of countries that identified a band for IMT, represented in purple, and the number of countries that have assigned the band for IMT services, represented in green. To give some examples, the frequency 450 megahertz was identified globally for IMT, and there is still very low usage. And even the 700 megahertz band that was identified by over 180 countries for IMT is still not used in all APT countries, albeit the leading role of APT in defining the band plan. Next. Additional examples are seen in the mid-band spectrum here, where several globally identified frequency bands for IMT are still not very much used, as for example, parts of the L band and the 2.3 gigahertz band. Next. With that, I will take this opportunity to invite all participants of the forum to join the discussions taking place within the ITUR study groups. The meetings are now taking place physically with remote participation. And let me tell you that last week we have the meeting of the Working Party 5D in Geneva. We had a lot of people coming to Geneva, so there were a lot of in-person participation, and the productivity of the meeting improved significantly with respect to the fully virtual meetings. So everybody was very happy. I'm getting very positive feedback from everybody, and everybody is very enthusiastic about this coming back to physical meetings, and with the promise that we could advance much more our work from now on. As not everybody can travel, and also because of virtual meetings open the possibility of people that are not able to travel, not for the pandemic reasons, but for financial reasons or others, we will continue to include a remote participation possibility for all meetings of the ITUR in the future. Administrations are also very much welcome to host a working party or study group meeting in the future. As you know, the construction of the new building in the ITU will start next year, and there will be a significant reduction of the availability of meeting rooms in ITU. So it would be very good to have countries hosting some of the meetings of study groups or working parties because we are restricted to the CICG, and the CICG is not only for the ITU. As you know, every organization in Geneva of the UN family can use it, and in fact, they use it. So the availability is also restricted in this regard. And finally, please note that the ITU website for WRC 23 is now available, and I invite you to visit it with updated information on the conference itself. And then the next slide is just to thank you very much for your attention, and looking forward to our session, session 3, to discuss specifically on the preparation of the conference. Thank you.
Mario, thank you so much. And as ever, it's really interesting to get that insight into some of the plans and the work that's already been done in preparation for WRC 23. So look, thank you so much. With questions, what we'll probably do, if it's okay with you, as you say, you're going to be back shortly for session 3 to look in depth at the issues related to WRC 23. So we'll keep the questions for then, and I'm sure we'll be able to answer any questions that come in during that session. But for now, Mario, thank you once again so much. Really do appreciate you taking the time to be with us and to help us to open the conference. So thank you so much indeed.
My pleasure.
So that concludes our opening ceremony, and I'm delighted to now get things started with our first panel for the conference. So I'd like to welcome up to the stage here at the conference venue our moderator for the session, Rio Santos from ITU, and our 2 in-person panelists, Guillaume Mascot from Nokia and Peng Zhao from OneWeb. So if I could invite you to come and join us on the stage here now, gentlemen. And we also have our panelists who will be joining us remotely, so they'll be with us here as well. So whilst we are our panelists are making our way up to the stage, I'd just like to take this opportunity to once again say a big thank you to everyone for joining us, to welcome you all one final time, and to wish everyone a very fruitful 2 days, and I'm sure lots of interesting discussions. Thank you very much. And with that, Rio, I will pass over to yourself to moderate our first session. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. We're all very excited for us to start our first discussion for today. But before that, allow me to provide a brief introduction of our session for today. Countries across the Asia-Pacific region are hugely varied stages in their connectivity journey. More developed nations across the region had led the way globally in 5G deployment, and are starting to take the lead in the early stages of 6G development, while more developing nations are still focused on rolling out 4G or even 3G services and on connecting often large areas that still remain unconnected. This dichotomy often leads to very different connectivity priorities across neighboring countries and complex challenges for spectrum managers looking to deliver a coherent spectrum policy that encompasses the needs of all. These sessions will look at the best way to balance these priorities and the work that is being done to develop a spectrum strategy that meets the needs of all the countries across the diverse region. Ladies and gentlemen, for us to start this discussion, our first speaker and resource person for today is the principal engineering expert of the National Broadcasting and Telecommunication Commission, or NBTC, Thailand. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Mr. Sanay Saiwong.
Good morning, everyone. Although I'm in Bangkok, I'm participating remotely. So nice to see you again on the Asia Pacific Spectrum Management Conference this year, held in Bangkok. Welcome to Bangkok. I will just would like to take your time for like 7-10 minutes, not more than that, to talk about just a few points that I would like to make in this discussion. I've been asked to talk about how to balance the priority. I will in our spectrum management area in the case of our country, Thailand. Next slide, please. So I think in our case, the spectrum management can be balanced towards three thoughts. The first one would be we would like to have a sufficient spectrum to support our digital economy. We are opening up, or we are open to innovation and new technologies so that every one of our citizens can access the better service and technology. And we would like to make sure that all our colleagues have equitable access, which include everyone's in the list of accessibility. And also in the terms of spectrum manager, I believe that everyone is talking about efficient use of spectrum, compatible use, and also harmonization. I think a lot more we will talk later during the workshop. In the next slide, you will see that our spectrum roadmap, I think some of you may have noticed that it covers 5 years and which band will be available in which year. That one will cover 2019 until 2023. My colleague will talk more about that in the later session tomorrow. And in the next slide, you can see that we have highlighted our spectrum status for IMT in our country. After we auction off the multi-band auction for 726 megahertz, 2.6 gigahertz and 26 gigahertz band for the last 2 years, it began rolling out in our country, except the 26 gigahertz, which is on a pre-commercial trial rollout. For others, you can see that what I would like to stress here is for the 3.5 and 28 gigahertz bands, they are under studies. I will talk about that a little bit later. And also for the bands that has been used previously by 3G and 4G, because our commission has adopted the policy of technology neutrality, so it can be upgrading to 5G if the technology can be achieved in that area. And for the 6 gigahertz, we are awaiting the related studies under WRC. I think there is a session dedicated to the 6 gigahertz band later in the conference. I would like to show you what we have done in terms of a spectrum outlook in the next slide. We have two separate studies we have conducted. One in 2019. That one is the initial spectrum outlook we have done so far. In that, I just captured just only the IMT part and the satellite part for our point of view in that regard. The initial study would see that in 2030, we will need like 1000 megahertz in the sub-6 band and 1.5 gigahertz in the millimeter wave band. So the total would be around like 25,000 megahertz. For the satellite, it equates into the finding equates into the gigabit per second. Sorry. So it would we would need around 100 and 320 gigabits per second in 2030. That one is the estimate for the spectrum outlook for both services. In the next slide, I will show you what we have done. Next slide, please. Yes. What we have done this year, actually, we have redo the spectrum demand forecast just only for the IMT one. We have done the simulation on how we can meet the demand of the download speed, as you can see from the left to right, 30 megabit per second until 100 megabit per second. What we came to a conclusion is that our current spectrum supply for IMT cannot be met by the demand of 100 megabit download speed for our users. That one. So we need to find more spectrum on what is more advanced technology to achieve that. Our finding will be shown in the next slide. So in conclusion, we forecast based on our current population prediction, whether rural-urban migration is in the second part, and also the download speed. So in short, we will, as you can see from the diagram, the graph on the bottom right hand. So it estimates the current and the future demand in 2030 timeframe. So you will see that we need like for the download speed, we need of 100 megabit per second, and also the upload speed is 50. We will need about 3.5 more on the uplink, on the downlink, and 3 times more on the uplink. So in the next slide, we'll show that we have done also some studies in Thailand on how we can better use the spectrum between the IMT and satellite. We focus on 2 bands. One is 3.5 gigahertz and the other is 28 gigahertz band. The study has recently finished. We will publish the result in the near future. What we foresee is that how we can better achieve the spectrum use in 3.5 and 28 gigahertz band in terms of whether we need guard band and other mechanism to coexist of these 2 services. I would like to just in the next slide, next to last slide. Yeah. The findings is interesting. In the case of 3.5 gigahertz band, the real field trials will find that if we use indoor low power MT base station, it can coexist. But for outdoor macro MT base station, it can coexist on certain conditions, like if you have to change the LNB of the satellite dish into the 5G protection LNB, we need some kind of guard band and we need some kind of separation distance. We will take that into account in harmonizing our approach in using 3.5 gigahertz band, and also similarly for 28 gigahertz band. In the last slide, I think in Thailand we see that nobody is competing for the spectrum, but it sometimes can be complementary. So you see that in terms of our country, we may need both services, both satellite and IMT, to coexist and provide complementary service to each other. That's our thought on several competing demands. So that one, I will stop here, and I would happy to take the panelist questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hello. Hi, thank you very much, Mr. Sanay Saiwong, for a very comprehensive discussion regarding Thailand's situation and spectrum management. Now, please reserve your questions later, and then once all the presenters and our resource persons presented, we will accommodate all the questions. For now, let us welcome the Deputy Director in the Frequency Planning and Management of Radio Regulation Bureau of the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology of the People's Republic of China. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Ms. Zhang Hong. Over to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, good day to you all. I'm Zhang Hong from the Radio Regulation Bureau of the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology in China, and I would like to thank Forum Global for inviting me to the conference. I think this conference gives a great opportunity for governments and industries to deepen understanding and share knowledge. And today, I would like to share with you my understanding and considerations on the spectrum strategy for 5G and beyond in China. And as we all know, the new generation of mobile communication technology and ecosystem empowered by 5G now is accelerating its convergence with various industries, which brings profound changes to economic and social development and plays an important role in bridging the digital divide and promoting the well-being of humanity. And the spectrum is the fundamental resource of the development of the mobile communication industry. And spectrum policies have a profound impact on technology routes, construction costs, and business models. And China's radio administrations have long been committed to planning and allocating appropriate spectrum resources for the development of mobile communication. And based on the features of high, mid, and low frequency bands, we promote the leading and the fundamental roles of spectrum policies and makes use of the advantages in the middle and the low frequency band to support the rapid large-scale deployment of 5G. And up to now, China has planned about 1,200 megahertz spectrum in the middle and the low frequency bands for IMT system, and along which 770 megahertz spectrum has been licensed for 5G. And first, we promoted the mid-band as the primary spectrum. And we give full play to the advantages of mid-band based on its capacity, coverage, and low costs in deployment. In 2017, we released the planning for 5G mid-band usage, where 3.5 gigahertz, 4.9 gigahertz, and the reformed 2.6 gigahertz frequency band were brought into use for 5G commercial deployment. And this allowed each Chinese mobile network operator to obtain at least 100 megahertz contiguous mid-band bandwidth for 5G. And secondly, we reformed the low frequency band. Due to its good propagation characteristics, the low band will promote wider and deeper coverage of 5G. So in 2020, part of the 700 megahertz band originally used for radio and telecommunication and television services was adjusted for 5G systems in China. And part of the 2.1 gigahertz band was reformed to 5G to further improve spectrum utilization efficiency. And now we have achieved significant progress in China's 5G network deployment, with the rising number of subscribers and the greater roles in enabling traditional industries. And by the end of the 2021, China had built the world's largest 5G network with a total of 1.4 million 5G base stations, which covered all cities at prefectural level and continues to expand into rural areas. The number of 5G mobile phone users in China reached 355 million. And the innovative cases of 5G application covers more than 20 sectors, such as manufacturing and telemedicine. And next, I would like to talk about spectrum considerations on the next generation of mobile communication. And I think mid-band is being considered as the primary band for 5G globally so far. And new research released by the GSMA shows that the global demand for mid-band frequencies for 5G will increase significantly from 2025 to 2030. And in average, 2000 MHz in mid-band for IMT is required to support the sustainable development of 5G in order to meet the 5G target as defined by ITU. And the 6 GHz frequency band is the only available band with the large bandwidth in the middle frequency range. And comparing to the high frequency band, the 6 GHz band has advantages in coverage, capacity, and cost. Therefore, the 6 GHz frequency band is easy to deploy on the national-wide level, which is especially suitable for developing countries to deploy mobile communication network at a low cost. And meanwhile, with the wide deployment of optical fiber, the satellite communications have gradually expanded to higher frequency bands. In many countries, C-band downlink service frequencies for fixed satellite service have been auctioned off or planned for IMT, which paves the way for the released frequency resources in the uplink 6 GHz frequency band to be used in 5G. Therefore, the 6 GHz frequency band is key spectrum for future mobile communication deployment. Now we are carrying out the coordination and preparation for the use of the 6 GHz frequency band. And in January of this year, the MIT made a public consultation on the adjustment of frequency planning of microwave communication system. According to the consultation paper, the whole 6 GHz band will no longer be used for microwave in the future in China. And we are also revising the regulations on radio frequency allocation of the People's Republic of China and studying the possibility of 6 GHz band used for future mobile communication. And in the future, under the frameworks of ITU and APT, we would like to work with authorities and industries to promote the global or regional harmonization of spectrum to make its utilization more rational, efficient, and economic, and to further strengthen its role in the development of the global digital economy as well. And to conclude, I would like to express my sincere thanks for your attention and thank Forum Global for organizing this enlightening session. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hong. Now, let us proceed with our third presenter. He is a director of the Spectrum Policy and Planning from the Ministry of Communication and Informatics in Indonesia. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Mr. Denny Setiawan.
Thank you, Forum Global, for this amazing opportunity where we can share key topics in spectrum management for Asia Pacific. And in this opportunity, I would like to share the Indonesia spectrum strategy on 5G implementation and also the for satellite. This year, we have analog switch off in 700 MHz finalization. We expect to have the switch off nationwide in November 2022. We expect to have 3 stages. The first stages in the next 7 days, in 30 April, and we now start stage to have preparation of analog switch off in I think the first stage. So we expect that we can release the 700 MHz in the end of this year or early next year. And we would like also to keep pace with other, I think, developed countries and also our colleagues in ASEAN countries as well to provide the capacity band. We focus on 3.5 GHz. We have consulted and discussion with our satellite operators. we have 3 national satellites, and the lifetime is quite still a long time. We have, I think, managed to have a geographical, separation, and we conduct some guard band also the price testing. We believe that the scenario, as Indonesia is consists of the archipelago, the 5G will in terrestrial will not in the rural areas. So we believe that the satellite in sea or extended sea, particularly for identified 5G, is still can play key roles in rural areas. So I think with this combination, we expect that we can release the 5G in 3.5 gigahertz next year. We also understand that the millimeter wave, I think the 26 gigahertz is more the candidate now. We have some trial with the operators in some event like MotoGP in last month in Lombok. We understand that also 28 gigahertz is particularly very important for high throughput satellite. And in this event, we also would like to share with you our plan to have not only one, but so 2, maybe more high throughput satellite for Indonesia to provide some connectivity in the rural areas. So we understand that K-band is very important for satellite, but I think we also looking the opportunity, the coexistence between small scale or maybe some part of 20 gigahertz in for 5G with satellite if possible. So we also follow the I think the trend on the other band as well, like in 6 gigahertz and 4.9 gigahertz as well. That I think will be discussed in the next WRC. And our situation, 9 gigahertz is quite expensive to use for microwave link, and I think so we need to mapping very carefully through the countries, because I think our fiberization is not as massive as I think like other previous speakers. So in the sense that both terrestrial and satellite service are very important for Indonesia to balance the conditional need. I think for additional spectrum 5G, both the high band, middle band, and lower band, and hopefully even it's very difficult situation, but I think we can take advantage of the fast country. We can manage how to I think separate between rural, between major cities, that both systems can coexist. I think that's conclude my presentation, and I really enjoy this event, and hopefully we can share and we can learn from each other. Thank you. I give back the floor to Mother. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Denny from Indonesia. Thank you very much for your time. And now let us proceed with our next resource person. Joining us here live in Bangkok, he is the head of government relations of Asia Pacific, Japan, and India of Nokia, Mr. Guillaume Mascot. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm very glad to be here. I must admit that after 2 years, it's quite a relief to be able to meet everyone here. I would have loved to have even more people in the room, but yeah, it would take time that we will all be all again together. So I would like to thank Global Forum and APT and ITU for organizing this event. I think it's quite time-wise to do that. I think what we have observed for the last 2 years is not only what we have experienced with COVID, but a lot of things have happened during that time. And that's what I want to do with my presentation. I have some few slides to present. So, as such, what happened during the last 2 years? Okay, we got COVID, but we got as well the emergence of 5G. So what we have seen is that 5G demand has really picking up. And as you can see with all the numbers, it has grown explosively. So we've got more than 200 operators that have launched their 5G network around 72 countries. We've got already operators investing in standalone network. We've got the adoption and the availability of device, which is more than 857 devices. And as we have heard as well with China and in the rest of the world, we have more than 400 million subscribers on 5G, so, which is almost 20% at the end of the world population have access end of 2021 to 5G. So even if we were, I would say, occupied and at home, 5G has become a reality in the world during the pandemics. And I would like to make a mention, because one of the, in the title of our presentation today and our session is, it's a spectrum strategy for, I would say, the whole countries. There were some questions if there are some advanced or, I would say, developing country. I want to make it clear that no matter where you are, 5G has been deployed. And you can see that it's not a question like what we were discussing 2 years ago, where we were always mentioning Japan, Korea. No, what we have witnessed is that the deployment has been in lots of countries and independently of the stages of development. So that's a critical aspect that we need to highlight. It's not, I would say, Europe versus Africa or whatever. It's everyone has 5G and needs 5G. But the urgency, and this is something that will be as well mentioned by my colleague from Satellite, we have to ensure that it doesn't bring even more digital divide. So we have to be sure that 5G is available, but we have to go faster. We have to go faster into the rural area to bring more speed, more technology, because the more you wait, the less people will get connected to this new technology. And this is where we have to think about spectrum planning. And I think it's very clear that there is a good sign of spectrum allocation, but most of the country, I would say, should not rest on their laurel, and we have to think about the expansion. We have already seen a lot of second stage of extension of spectrum availability with more band, and as it has been said by the different regulators before, from a low, mid, and high band capacity spectrum band. So from a launch perspective, we have to go to, So from a launch phase, we are now into an expansion phase in several countries. So we have right now to think about what would be the next phase. So we have seen the availability and deployment the last 2 years, but we have to think about the next 5 years now. Because yes, we have to think about band for 5G and potentially a glimpse on 6G, but yes, we have to expand the capacity and thinking about more about the expansion and the high capacity. And as it has been said by the previous presenters, mid-band will be crucial. So more C-band and 4.9 are critical. MM-wave is something that needs to be more developed as well. And there's the low band. And as Mario mentioned, we've got the 700 and now as well the 600, and it needs to be deployed. We have these resources available, and we need to move beyond that. And why do we need more spectrum? Because we have seen a lot of experiment and a lot of use cases happening around the world, and not only for consumer, but as well in terms of demand for industry. And we have seen a huge demand for private wireless. And you can see that it is spanning around different sectors like transport, energy, mining, ports, and manufacturing. And we have worked with lots of customers and operators to deploy this new private wireless network. And more than 80% already are 5G radio. So we see an impetus from different numbers of stakeholders, and not only the consumers, to move beyond and see all the capabilities of 5G. And this aspect of private wireless is something that needs to be supported and promoted as well with more spectrum. So what's the status? Let's be honest. So the actual status and next step is, yes, we've got the 5G deployment and we have well underway the licensing and rollout. But yes, we have to start the planning for additional spectrum. And it has been mentioned by Mr. Sewang from NBTC. So we need to ensure that we have more spectrum to ensure that we are catering the mobile growth and 5G advance. So we need to think right now for 2025 and beyond. And as said, after 2030, yeah, 6G could potentially be there. So we need to ensure that every regulators are really this combination of low, mid, and high band to ensure that we have the full flavor of 5G. And of course, and I know we always say that, but yes, we need to have a 5G ready policy. You need to stimulate as well the take-up of new services. And I can only recommend on what has been done by Australia or Singapore to really put in place a national innovation fund where you can stimulate different critical sectors to adopt 5G and see what they can do with this new technology. So we need to simplify and streamline the deployment of 5G base station indoor and outdoor. So let's make it easy. And finally, yes, 6G is around the corner. I know that sounds weird to already mention that, but yes, the industry is starting to work on that. One of the key aspects that we are looking is the terahertz. So there will be session on 6G later on, so I will not touch about that. But yes, we need to think 10 years from now, and we have to start right now to plan everything. So just as a key recommendation, as it has been said before, yes, please have a look to the low band. There are the 600 that are starting to get traction in the region and in the US. We've got 700 megahertz that are still there that needs to be deployed. I think there are parts where 450 and 410 could be as well investigated a bit more. There are a very interesting case in Germany called the 450 Connect aspect for private wireless for energy, and that's quite interesting to see how it can be used. And then the mid-band, as it has been said by MIIT, 6 gigahertz is crucial, especially when you have, I would say, the need for more spectrum with, I would say, very few availability in the mid-band. So you need to make, I would say, a huge analysis concerning your spectrum availability and ensure that we get all this spectrum for the benefit of the deployment. And of course, the MM wave. It's something that is gaining traction, and we need to have this aspect. On that note, yes, I think this is what you will hear in the next 2 days. Spectrum is crucial, and it's part of the national agenda. So when you think about your spectrum allocation, you should always think 5, 10 years ahead. And that's very crucial, even from the industry, to ensure that we are bringing the best technology on the market. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Guillaume. I think you emphasized a very important point there when you said that 5G is already everywhere, and for the role for us to ensure that it doesn't bring more digital divide is crucial for government to ensure that there is a 5G ready policies and it become a national agenda. No? Now, to further expand this component of our discussion for today, let us welcome the Vice President and Government Affairs of Policy of OneWeb, Mr. Peng Zhao.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dario, for the introduction, and good morning, everyone. And it's really my great pleasure to be present here today. Thank you to Forum Global for organizing this in-person event. It's really great to meet and see and to shake hands again with some of the colleagues and friends here in person, but also welcome to the online audience as well. So my presentation today is on OneWeb. If I can have my slide, please. So I'll give you a short presentation about OneWeb and how our perspective about connectivity, global connectivity, and digital divide. So just a quick introduction about OneWeb. So we are kind of a global company, a satellite company. We believe that the space is the future of the communication on Earth. We are building a kind of a global satellite networks, and we're deploying satellites on a monthly basis. And our network is, in fact, in the final phase of the deployment, and we're hoping to meet and bring commercial service to everywhere in the corner of the Earth by next year. As you see, we're supported by a global range of shareholders, including the UK government, but also Bharti Enterprise, Indian conglomerate, SoftBank, a Japanese conglomerate, and Hanwha, Korean. So if you look at our shareholders, but also Eutelsat and Hughes, of course. But if you look at our DNA, it's probably really squeezed to our APAC because of our biggest shareholder are based here. So what do we want to bring to this world of connectivity, and why do we see this opportunity here for us at OneWeb and for the LEO communication, LEO satellite communication in general? So I bring here a slide from our friend from the ITU. In the latest facts and figures, they show the percentage of individuals using internet by the location. And as you can see here, it's like on the left-hand side is that people in rural area is twice less likely to have access to broadband internet than people in the urban area. There are many factors, of course. There are digital literacy, there are different other things, but one of the key factors is also the coverage, because as many of you know, and certainly in this region, the primary access means for the internet is mobile broadband. And as we can see here, it's like in developed countries, the difference of coverage between between rural and urban is not that big. It's 85% versus 89%. But in developing countries, the differences can be quite big, so half of it. And especially the difference is even more pronounced in the least developing countries and the landlocked developing countries or small islands, as reflected by the ITU stats. So we took a look at the reason why the coverage, especially for the mobile network, is so low in the rural areas. And we saw that, by some study by GSMA and from last year, you can see that on the bottom left-hand side, you see the cost of deployment of a mobile network. So the example here at the bottom is the example of the cost to deploy, the capex required to deploy mobile network in a country. And you can see that it's fairly linear for the first 70–80% of the population. So the cost, the more you cover, the cost increase gradually. However, to the last 20%, and especially the last 10% of the population, when you want to cover that people in the rural area and the remote areas, the cost increase exponentially. And to cover the last 10% of the country, this is just one example country, but many countries are in similar kind of curve. The last 10% of the country, it costs probably the same or even more than the first 80% of the deployment. And one of the big factor is the backhauling. It's very costly to roll out the fiber optics and any fixed infrastructure in those rural areas. For example, I was given numbers such as like $10,000 for each kilometer of fiber. So it doesn't always make sense economically for the mobile operator to cover that. And that's where we try to intervene. So we want to reduce the cost of the backhauling, especially, and we want to help the mobile operator to cover those unreached areas and really underserved areas. So that as Guillaume said earlier, it's not only about 5G, only about the city centers, but we need to bring 5G to every corner in the world. So you may say that satellite communication existed for many, many years, and some mobile operators already working with some satellite operators, traditional satellite operators, for backhauling for their 2G and 3G base stations. What do we bring as OneWeb, and especially with the LEOs? So LEO, low Earth orbits, we are much closer to Earth. So our constellation is at 1,200 kilometers high compared to the 36,000 kilometers for a geostationary satellite. So one of the key difference is the latency. So we are able to bring latency close to 50 milliseconds. And with that, we can offer, especially to our partners, mobile operators, we can offer their customer much more applications. So typically cloud application or even voice over LTE needs latency lower than 150 milliseconds. And that's something we can offer easily with LEO constellations. And of course, gaming and any kind of virtual presence and metaverse, etc., that you hear more and more talking about. So we hope that with this improvement of the performance, we can offer to the mobile operators and to the other partners for them to increase the demand and increase the data consumption because of those new usages. And also on the supply side, we are lowering our costs. So we manufacturing one satellite per day in our factory right now. And this mass satellite production will decrease the cost, but also the launch cost is highly reduced as well. So this lower of the cost and more demand, we believe that it's something that can bring a lot of disruption in the satellite communication. Here is just an example of how we intend to work with the mobile operators, for example. So typically, one of the operator will deploy their base station, and they will use our system here to do the backhauling to their core network. And then the core network with the data traffic, once it reaches the MNO's core network, will be dispatched to the internet or to any other means. So we call ourselves a middle mile service provider. So, and then the last mile and the access technology will still be provided by our partners. Where we are today, we are, as I mentioned, we are launching monthly cadences. We launched so far 13 completed launch, and we have up to date 428 satellites in the sky operational. Our launch schedule is slightly delayed because of the war in Ukraine, but we will resume later our launch by end of this year. And as we mentioned, we will be having global service by next year. And right now, we're building also our ground infrastructure. We're building gateways. We need 40 gateways globally. And there's one gateway that is undergoing construction here in Thailand, and we also have one next to Jakarta in the region. Just because it's a spectrum conference, we have to mention all the spectrums that we're using. So we're using the Ku band for our service links, so basically between satellite and user terminals, and Ka band between our gateway and the satellite. So it is quite important for the industry to have assurance from the global regulator about this visibility and availability of the bands, and especially Ka bands for the satellite communications. So it is have a few other kind of recommendation and best practices. I will leave it at here because of the time is running out for me. But certainly, there's many new regulations that is required, and I'm happy to work with all of you, and especially with the regulator, to get this, to bring our technology into your market to bridge the digital divide. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Zhao. Now we are in a very exciting stage in our discussion today. We would like to open the floor for questions for any questions from our audience and participants. We are also receiving some questions online, but before that, is there any question that you would like to ask from any of our panelists for today? Any question? Don't be shy. It's been two long years now before we before we went back to this kind of session live. But yes, please. Is there any question? Okay. If none, there are some questions that we receive online. One of the question for OneWeb and Nokia representative. As we move into 5G era and beyond, what scope do you think there is for increased satellite or mobile cooperation? And what possibility for hybrid terrestrial and satellite networks?
Okay, maybe I go first then. I think there's a huge opportunity to collaborate between the terrestrial and the space industry. As I mentioned before, one of our business models is definitely to work with the mobile operators to allow them to bring this, their connectivity in the rural areas, which is not really feasible right now economically because of the high cost to deploy in those areas. So we are working with them, and also one thing I haven't mentioned is that in the OneWeb, our complete system is built on the 3GPP standard. So we are fully integrated, and we can do things for 5G, for example, typically network slicing and increased guaranteed quality of service. That's all the things that is required for the mobile operators. So this allows it to be fully integrated, and I think working hand in hand, we can bring connectivity everywhere and not just city centers.
I think we have to be realistic and down to earth in a certain way. The operators have their economic model, so they will try to look as well at what would be the best economic value and the best, I would say, infrastructure to deploy based on their return of investment as well. So I think we should not be dogmatic as well from I would say, the different side. And we have a duty to cooperate and work together to ensure that we are bringing connectivities where there are no connectivity. So there are some pros and cons on every technologies, and this is also based on our cooperation and our work with the operators that, yes, we have to bring the best. So I think that's the key point. And yes, we have to work with satellite, we have to work with operators so that, yes, we have the right mix. And that's only what matters. The only thing that we should be driven by is the end user. So even if there may be some, I would say, debate about technologies, about spectrum availability, I think we are all on the same boat. We have a duty to do for the people.
Thank you very much. Also joining us from online, we also have our panelists online. If you have any questions, anyone? Yes, please. The mic from this gentleman in front.
Okay, sorry. Hi, good morning. First of all, thank you very much for such a wonderful panelists. It's also I'm so really great to see in person. As a person who is currently interested about the blockchains and the cryptocurrencies graphical approach, I just have a kind of a comparison, and also I'd just like to represent some of the other people who are still doing dilemmas about the comparisons between the Starlinks and 5G providers, especially in terms of not just only for the urban areas, but also for the rural areas, for the cost-wide values, reliability, and accessibility, and regulatory perspectives as well.
Sorry, I wasn't able to catch all the questions.
What I was saying is, it's Most of the people as around my age does have a kind of a dilemmas and also have always been asked questioning for the Starlink's providers and also the 5G providers, like comparisons between to implement not just only for the urban areas but also for the rural areas. So I just would like to hear about some of the constructive feedback and also comparison between them.
Starlink. Okay.
SpaceX, Starlink. SpaceX.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. If I can give my personal assessment, I mean, Starlink, of course, is one of the OneWeb's competitors, but their business model is sensibly different than OneWeb. As I mentioned, we are partnering with local distribution partners to bring that service. They want to go direct, so they want to provide direct to consumer, which is something that OneWeb we don't do. So I can't really comment on the efficiency of that. But I mean, one thing is you have to ask is about the cost and the economics. Can they find enough consumer, especially in this region, in developing countries, can they find enough consumer at the price range they want, which is much higher than the normal ARPU. Whereas our model is more about, because we partner with the mobile operators, the end consumer is still mobile operators' customer. So what typically consumer can expect is that even if they are in the most remote area, they can pay the same price package as people that is in the city center. Meaning that whatever ARPU they have, so I don't know, for some of the country, I think which is ARPU is less than $5 per month, they can expect to pay the same price and still have access to a good 4G, 5G connectivity because of this the way that our business model is working. So unfortunately, I can't comment much more on the Starlink itself, but that's the way I see it.
Okay. Anyone else from the panelists? Okay. I will just read a question from online for MIIT. How can regulators balance the continual need to find additional spectrum for 5G and soon 6G with the need to protect satellite services, which offer vital services across many developing regions and island areas? Additionally, what is the 6 gigahertz roadmap and time schedule assigned for IMT 5G in China? Ms. Hong?
Okay, I will answer this question. And while the demand for radio frequency spectrum is growing rapidly, the competition between IMT and other terrestrial and space services in frequency usage has been intensifying. And China has been committed to balanced development of different radio services, and we are promoting application of new technologies while protecting other incumbent services as well. And maybe I can take one example that is how we resolve the compatibility and the sharing questions between 5G and the satellite earth stations in C-band. And the coordination between 3.5 gigahertz IMT and satellite services related to tens of thousands of earth stations in China, and also multiple satellites in orbit across many government departments and stakeholders. And in 2018, China launched the program to verify incumbent radio stations in the same and adjacent frequency bands of 5G. And the program identified the incumbent radio stations which should be protected from interferences. And in the same year, and in 2019, China respectively published regulations and guidelines on coordination of interference between 5G base stations and other radio stations in frequency band 3,000 to 5,000 megahertz. Formulated the specification for 5G base stations and accelerating the update of satellite transponders. And by the end of the year 2021, the coordination rate of influenced satellite Earth stations had exceeded 99%, and more than 12,000 Earth stations have completed technical transformation. And China is also actively participating in the 6 gigahertz study in ITU and APT. And it is encouraging to see that our study shows, under the current assumptions, it is feasible for the 6 gigahertz IMT system to coexist with other incumbent services. A number of other administrations have reached similar conclusions with China too. It is worth noting that although the study is on the upper 6 gigahertz band, the conclusions of the study shall be applicable to lower 6 gigahertz band as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For a question for Mr. Sai Wong
there's-
and Dr. Denny. What planning is being done across the region or at the national level to prepare for the next stage of wireless rollout, and what roadmaps are emerging right now in your own respective country? Thank you very much. Mr. Sai Wong, maybe start.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I think for regional level, there are a lot of talks and conference meeting going on how to best achieve the spectrum harmonization, either in low band, mid band, and also high band. I think right now we are focusing on mid band. There are talks around the region also. So that one, I think one of the main theme of this conference is also trying to achieve that kind of harmonization. But for our national level, we have, I would say that there are two kinds of approach we are using right now. For the licensing scheme, the rollout obligation is um, one of the key priorities of how we can achieve the rollout obligation within our country. The government is trying to push for some agenda in terms of how we can offer better service to the public. So, as a regulator, we try to monitor and do the licensing framework that allows us to balance between the digital economy and also the affordability of services. For the planning itself, as you can see, Thailand has already done a lot in terms of uh, to make sure that certain band of spectrum will be released, is to be released on time to meet the demand of the INT community. I think the key point is the close collaboration with the stakeholders, especially our operators, so that although we try to push something, if the operator is not willing to do that in terms of because of high cost, high investment cost, or something like that, it will become nothing. So in terms of the consultation and what we can do and what they can do, I think is the best way that we optimally try to assist as a facilitator, not a regulator per se, facilitator to make them provide better service to the community. That's what we think that NTC has done so far. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sai Wong. Dr. Denny?
Yeah. On our guest, on the rate. We have that. I think we discussed the well our and also we are within ASEAN framework, Thailand, Vietnam, so on so forth. And also the forum in APAC as well. So I think that's good for us to understand the roadmap and the trend. And in national level, we have developed the 5G task force, and we invite some academics and operators and vendors to provide some of the roadmap, not only but also the infrastructure. Our focus now actually to provide the 4G nationwide, but I think the people they don't care about the technology, but the case that the service provide quality of service. I think some 5G have to prepare, but we need to find some business model use case that the mobile operators can self-sustain.
Okay, thank you very much. Any more questions from the floor, please? Yes, Mr. Question, Mike, please.
Hi. Hi, Guillaume. Hi, Peng. How are you? Christian here. There are two key points, I think, from the various presentations. There are various flavors of 5G, C-band 5G, millimeter wave 5G. Two key and important events happened in the last 3 years when it comes to 5G and millimeter wave. One of them was the survey that the Korean government carried out at the end of last year, where the government was looking to check for the compliance on the millimeter wave licenses that were sold 3 years prior. So in the compliance check, the Korean government found that the license conditions were not met. So the key condition was the license holders were to deploy 45,000 5G stations in the country in 3 years. And the survey by the Korean government found that only 160 base stations were deployed. So the operators did not meet the condition. So that's one. The number two is the view of the United States government. So the United States government, the chair of the FCC, has changed the priority for 5G in the United States, moving away from millimeter wave and focusing on C-band, mid-band. And quoting the words of the FCC chair, basically millimeter wave 5G had the potential to increase the digital divide, not to resolve it. So we have two events, and there are a few others. Singapore is now consulting on how to allow satellite services in 28 gigahertz. And Japan, the Japan government is also consulting on how to allow satellite services in 28 gigahertz. And both countries, along with South Korea, were 5G leading countries in the region. So with that as a context, my question is for my colleague Guillaume. So how do you see the new concept of 5G, which is focusing on mid-band? Do you think mid-band spectrum will resolve the shortcomings of 5G in the millimeter wave? And how will those shortcomings be resolved? Thank you.
Can you, yeah, does it work? Thank you, Christian from Viasat. Well, I think there's not a question of having different flavor. As the industry is always mentioning, you know that it's a mix of spectrum bands from low, mid, and high band. There are different strategies based on the different countries on which band should come first. but I mean, all of them would be important. So there were a strategy to move first with mmWave in the US, and now they go with, and it was only a few operators where the other were also focusing on low and the C-band. So I think it's not either or. And there are use cases for every one of them for a different approach. So even on mmWave, there are lots of interesting part for indoor, for example, or even for industrial usage. On C-band, I think it's really based on the availability. As we said, everybody is looking at the C-band. So there are different band and there are this coexistence on some part. So that's why I think it's also based on what you have, I would say, available in terms of spectrum. So I would not put one spectrum band compared to the other. I think at the end game, at the end, is to have a spectrum in every part of the band, and this is what we even start to consider with 6G with the terahertz. So it's not, I would say, which one you will get, is are you ensure that you will have a portion of all of them at one point.
Thank you very much. We have a very limited time now for our wrap up and final question for all the speakers. I would like to request everyone, maybe to all our panelists, to answer the one final question. Ensuring connectivity is a question of infrastructure, affordability, and nationwide coverage. What are your views on what needs to be done by the government and all actors in ensuring that we narrow the digital divide? Anyone from our online panelists and would like to start?
Yes,
Mr. Saiwong.
Yes. I think you mentioned a lot of dilemma for us as a regulator, because the affordability of handsets and services, the coverage and the service are quite linked together. I think from our experience, we try to balance them all, because operator needs a lot of investment for 5G and in the future 6G. What we plead to the vendor is that do not scrap the legacy network. Try to build on the existing network so that the investment could be marginal, not the total investment completely. And for the affordability of the handsets, I believe that regional harmonization and global harmonization is playing a key role, because if we achieve regional harmonization, there's a lot of countries participating in that frequency band. A lot of models of the handsets are cheaper and coming to the market. If you choose to a bit awkward situation, different frequency bands from the others, then there's no affordable handset. As for the service, I think the regulator should quite balance the service pricing in terms of pricing and the quality of service to the consumer, so that in our laws there are also our duty to monitor that and regulate that if necessary. For the last part of national coverage, I think it is quite important. Otherwise, as you already mentioned, it will be another form of digital divide for 5G, for the 5G have and 5G have not. We try to achieve that by using the mechanism of the USO fund, so that we try to level up the urban area and the rural area and the suburban in between to have similar service to that basis. But it's quite challenging for us per se, because we have a lot of things more to be done on that level. But we try to make it better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else from the panelists?
Yeah. I think
Yes, Dr. Dennis.
yeah. I think there's no one solution for regulators should very carefully take into consideration whatever available and combine the
I'm sorry, we're losing you, Dr. Denny. I think we really need more spectrum management.
That's why.
Anyway,
Yeah. Yeah.
we'll get back to you, Dr. Denny. Ms. Hong, any final message regarding the digital divide and the role of everybody to work together?
Well, I think for the developing countries, I think the cost is one of the most important consideration. So that is the main. This is one of the main elements to help reduce the digital divide. And so, from our practice, also I have to say the mid-band is best choice to help developing countries to deploy network at a rapid rate. And secondly, I think how will the vertical industry applications develop holds the key to 5G deployment. And we have to maybe I can share some experiments of our country. We have guided 5G and other wireless technologies to innovate applications in industrial internet and IoT in order to promote intelligent and digital transformation of traditional infrastructure and manufacturing. And we have issued guidelines for radio frequency use in industrial internet and Internet of Things, and also been exploring radio spectrums for 5G industry, internet, and IoT separately, and studying to formulate relevant policies. In China, typical application scenarios of 5G plus industrial internet are gradually evolving to large-scale deployment so far. So I think those are the 2 points to reduce the digital divide. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Denny, final comment? Okay,
Yeah.
sorry, we lost you.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's just to continue my pass on people. I think society doesn't care about the technology. They care about the availability. And I think there is no one solution will fit all, and that's the role of the regulators, the operators, and the technology provider to find the most sustainable solution for people. I think and also, as mentioned the previous speaker, not only licensing but also we did cut the what kind of incentive like the government should provide some funding or the public partnership on whatever the solution. I think that's our field. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Guillaume or Peng, anyone, please? Mr. Guillaume?
I think so. Just to conclude, I think that we have put a lot of emphasis on spectrum and on the different band and on 5G, on 4G, and we have a duty as an industry and with policymakers to ensure that this availability and the product availability are cost effective and that we can roll out very rapidly. I think on that we all agree that we want more connectivity and more spectrum, and I mean that was the key message on what we are trying to deliver today. But I think one additional point, and we should not forget, there are lots of applications with a new technology that needs to be that's a way to be discovered, and it's only when you let people play and use this technology that you come with new idea, with new business model. If you remember with 4G, there are lots of applications that all the industry has said that will be the killer application, and it was totally not, and it was something else. So the key point and my plea here is really to ensure that let the people have access to the technology. Let them play, let them discover, and let them make new ideas. So, and on the digital divide, we need to bring this technology to a population that could use the technology differently to what we think can be used. So we have to bring this technology and see what could be new services for agriculture, for the people. Here, what we are bringing to every part of the world is not just connectivity. This is a new enabler of activities. And this is this aspect that we need to stimulate, in addition to spectrum. But let people explore the benefit of this technology.
Thank you very much. Mr. Peng?
Yeah. So if I could just follow up on that and conclude as well, is that, connectivity need to be inclusive, right? And we said several times in this panel as well, it's not only about providing the best technology or the fastest evolution of the technology to a certain subset of the citizen. We need to give it to all the population without delay. We can't wait for the rural community to wait 5 years before accessing the same technology as the others. So for that, it's a mixture of technologies that is needed, mobile, satellites, and maybe other technology as well. But as Guillaume just said, every wireless technology needs spectrum, and every industry needs a spectrum to be able to nurture and develop itself. And I think that's also come back to the question of millimeter wave that Christian asked, is do we really need that much of spectrum, especially in millimeter wave, only to serve a subset of the population? You have, more kind of probably low band and mid band is probably more useful for national coverage for 5G, for example. And also, even in millimeter wave, there's ample kind of abundance of millimeter wave identified in WRC19. It's 17 gigahertz in total. So why do we need for more spectrum that is not identified at EU level? So that's a big question also to the regulator. And I think my final message is just to say, please don't put all your eggs in the same basket. Don't give all the spectrum required to one particular industry. You really need all the industry to flourish and then to have the most adequate to cover your population. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very nice conclusion for our discussion for today. Connectivity needs to be inclusive, and we can make sure to make it happen through an enabling environment, proactive policy, and the use of innovation and new technology through collaboration. Thank you very much for all the speakers for today, our online speakers and our live speaker in Bangkok, and for your active participation. Thank you very much. Let's conclude the session today. Thank you.
So thank you very much to Rio for that and for expertly moderating that session. Thank you to Guillaume, thank you to Peng, and also to our virtual speakers, as Rio said. So we now have a short break. We're going to be starting again with our next session. We're going to start a little bit late. We're going to start 5 minutes later than planned. So at 11:20 Bangkok, we'll be starting again with our next session on WRC 23. So please feel free, for those of you who are watching virtually, to go and make yourself a coffee. For everyone here, there is coffee outside. But before we go to coffee, we'd like to take this opportunity of being back at an in-person event to have a group photo. So I'm going to invite you all to make your way up towards the stage, and we'll just have a very quick photo with everybody here before we go to coffee here. So if I could invite everyone to please make your way up towards the stage, and we'll do that, and then there'll be coffee outside. And as I said, we'll be back with the next session at 11:20. Thank you. So if I could ask people to wear masks as well if they're coming up onto the stage, that would be much appreciated. Thank you. So if I could ask people to come and make your way up to the stage, if we could have one line of people on the stage and a second line of people just at the front there. Hi, Hatsuko-san. Hello there. Lovely to meet you. Lovely to see you. Good to see you. And thank you so much for joining us. I know, it's fantastic, isn't it? It is, but it's great to be back in person. So maybe we could have the two of you in the middle on the stage. Yes, so possibly in the middle there, and then we can get everyone else around you. So if I could ask everyone to make your way up. So we have one line of people on the stage, and then one line standing just in front of the stage there. So hopefully we'll have enough space for everyone to be here and to be in the photo. Don't be shy. If I could ask everyone to please come forward. So if we could have maybe up on the... If I could ask you to come and maybe up onto the stage here. And for yourself, sir, as well, if I could ask you to... Thank you very much, everybody. And there is coffee and refreshments now being served outside. Thank you. So what we do, you'll have an iPad there. We'll just have an iPad and we have a Google Doc. Yeah, so we'll give you an iPad, yeah, and then it'll come up. Yes, yes.
Indeed, I know.
So welcome back, everybody, and I hope everybody's taken that opportunity to stretch your legs, have a short break, and it's good to have everyone in the room back with us, and also I hope everyone online now back with us for the next session of the conference. So we heard earlier as part of the opening ceremony an update from Mario Manovitz on some of the work that's being done to prepare for WRC 23. And we're now delighted to welcome back Mario and also have an expert panel with us to talk about WRC 23 and preparations in a lot more detail. So Mario, welcome back once again. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us. So yeah, looking forward to going into a lot more depth into some of the issues that you were discussing earlier. So we have an expert set of panelists. So I will pass over to you and really looking forward to the session. Over to you, Mario.
Thanks very much, Dan, and hello again, everybody. So as we said, we'll continue the discussion on WRC 23 preparations. And we have a set of experts from the various sectors of the industry and also a representative from the member states to guide us on what are their concerns at this point in the preparations for the WRC 23, if they consider that we are on track, and what is the main focus from now on for the preparation of the conference. As I said in my opening remarks, we are now switching to physical meetings in ITUR, both study groups and working parties. And although we will continue to have a remote component, as it is happening in this meeting, the physical gathering has shown that, as we expected, the discussions are much more fluid, exchanges among participants are much more friendly, and the meeting is more productive. So we hope that from now on till the end of the year, let's say, the productivity of these meetings will increase significantly because of the physical meetings, and then we will be able to catch up with all the issues that are still pending. Then the CPM text or the draft CPM text would be ready for the CPM in the first quarter of next year. So without further ado, let me start with a keynote presentation. And these keynote presentations will be delivered by Dr. KJ Wee, who is the chairman of the APT preparatory group for the conference, APG 23, who will share with us some thoughts regarding what I just said from the APG community. KJ, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mario. My name is Kyujin Wee, and as introduced by Mario, chairman of the APG 23, and I'm very pleased to have a chance to make some few words through these occasions. Particularly, this session 3 is discussing are we on the track with the preparations. So I'm ready to say a few words. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. This is a kind of the statistics that I have personally prepared for these sessions. So I have searched some statistics during the WRC 12 cycles, 15, 19, and this cycle as well. Regarding the APG activities, normally we meet 5 times for each cycles. And as you see in the table, normally from the beginning, around 200 participants and the small inputs. However, the fourth meeting or fifth meetings, the participants increased, sometimes up more than 500, which was our last case, APG 19. That was a fiscal meeting, but the participants are more than 500, and the number of the inputs from the members around more than 100. Having said that, comparing these statistics, I checked that for the preparation of the APG 23, this cycle, as you know, we met 3 times, and then all meetings, 3 meetings were virtually made. And then the participants, number of the participants from the beginning is more than 500. And the last meeting in last year, no, sorry, not, yes, last year we met virtually, but the participants was registered more than 700. However, as you see, the number of the inputs was decreased. And then this year, August, we will meet physically with the remote participations. And I guess the number of the participants will be back to the previous cycle. Maybe more than, because it's still allowed remote participations. So we are planning to meet 1 more meeting. Normally we meet 5 times, but this time we have planned to meet 6 times. So next slide, please. I already covered the first bullet, and the second bullet, virtual meeting does not provide sufficient meeting sessions, meeting times, due to the very widespread geographically. Among APT members, 38, but their time difference is 9.5 hours. So very wide area. So we virtual meeting only allowed 5 or 6 hours maximum, not 8 hours. That is one difficulties. So we decided to meet more than 1 more meetings. And then most important point is offline. Some people say it's the corridor discussions. Actually, it helps a lot of the progress, not only for better understanding, but for reconciliation. So, but even a virtual meeting provide such opportunity virtually, but it would not work as expected. During the virtual meeting, as I said, the number of employees decreased, but the participations has increased almost double. So such increasement of the participations in virtual meeting should be recognized in the preparation of the future meetings. I may say the physical meeting with our remote participation, so that we give the more opportunity for more peoples, more delegates to engage the work of the preparation of the WRC. Next slide, please. Fortunately, the last RA19 has improved some work for the CPM. I believe that helps us a lot during this cycle. One thing is the normally methods. There have been several methods. However, this time, within the methods, they may include some alternatives as well. So which would reduce the number of the methods, but may increase the details for implementations. And the second CPM also may receive and consider the contributions as a new material relating to the regulatory, technical, operational, and the procedural matters concerning the items. Also, second CPM may receive and consider the contributions concerning future agenda items other than those already contained as a preliminary agenda items, but the members or collectively as a group, they would provide something new one for information only, which will facilitate the work of the WRC, particularly for the development of the future agenda items. And also recent RAG meeting has discussed and has favored CPM steering committee to reconsider as soon as possible the draft CPM text submission deadline, so that some working party they have some difficulties to keep that deadline, but I believe that the CPM steering committee will provide some solutions so that we still keep the general schedules, the 2 months prior to CPM second, with the 6 languages draft CPM report. So during the RA19 discussion, we didn't expect this kind of the pandemic situations, but as always RA does, they improved the work of the method, and then this improvement of the CPM preparations will help us to prepare the WRCs. Next slide, please. There are some more points that I want to raise through these occasions. As you know, the Asia-Pacific regions, as I mentioned earlier, it's very widespread. So that the different interests due to the developed and the developings in economy situations and technology aspects as well, and the geographical situations. Some island country, Randra country, very huge countries, and huge populations and the small populations. Also, in this Asia-Pacific regions, there are some historical backgrounds and cultural differences. So I may say Asia-Pacific region is like a small globe. So it's very difficult in Asia-Pacific to make a harmonized view, particularly the agenda item is very complex. It's very difficult for APG. However, APG is currently modifying our working method in order to react the WRC discussions actively and timely. So last cycle, we recognize that the current working method is not good enough to react the WRC discussions, discussion with the other regional group, and the discussions in the plenary or committee levels, etc. So we are modifying the working methods. And also recently there was input to the almost all I2R working parties that raised issues that how to protect the secondary services. So at this stage, it is not clear. However, I believe that topic need to be discussed in everywhere, I mean that not only in the APG, but also other regional group as well. And someday we need to discuss how to manage the secondary service. Finally, it is very important to make and to have the very well sophisticated languages of the future agenda item and also its associated resolutions. It's very important for the preparation of the next cycle. Also, to make conclusions during the WRCs. So I think personally, we need some improvement of some operation of the Committee 6. Committee 6 normally responsible for the development of the future agenda. Not only that, but also others as well. But one small thought is the Committee 6 should not meet in the very, very late night session. Sometimes 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, or 3 o'clock. So we are human beings. It's not able to make a clear focus in such late night. So I'm thinking maybe avoiding the late night sessions may help us to make a very clear future agenda items. Also, sometimes languages among the 6 official languages, they may have different understanding. I'm not complaining at all for the Committee 7, but what I'm thinking is if the Committee 7 members join the discussion of the Committee 6 for the future agenda items, then they may help us. Also, I think that it is a prerequisite that active involvement of the BR experts. So they are really good experts, and that they may find easily if there's any discrepancies or ambiguities, etc., then BR expert may advise to the meeting to fix it. So that is the some further considerations, and I believe that the APG will continue to work how to improve the development of the future agenda items. With that, I'd like to conclude my short few words, and I'm ready to discuss with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, KJ. So you will join our discussion in the panel. And let me welcome the members of the panel then. As I said, we will have representatives from the main industry sectors. So we have Bashir Patel from the satellite industry. He is representing GSOA. We have Joe Guan, who is representing the mobile industry, and he is representing GSMA. And we have Elena Puigrefagut, who is representing the broadcasting sector, and she is from the EBU. So welcome all to this panel. And as we always do, let's start with some remarks from each one of you, and then we'll follow with the Q&A session. So let's go in the order I just mentioned, I just introduced you. So let's start with Bashir with his introductory presentation. Bashir, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mario, and greetings to your good self and to all the other colleagues joining this event and this particular session. Mario, first and foremost, let me thank Forum Global for this opportunity for GSOA, which is the Global Satellite Operators Association, to be present and to join in this sessions on spectrum issues related to the Asia Pacific region. Basically, GSOA is a body which is a global voice for the satellite operators and aims to promote common interest nationally, regionally, and globally. Earlier this year, we had 7 new members from the APAC region who's joined GSOA, and also on the board of GSOA, which is comprising of the CEOs of the operators, all the operators, regional operators, global operators, and so on. We've participated in many of the ITU, all ITU region events for many years. We've been members of ITU for 15 years and so on. So we continue to provide inputs on what faces the issues that are facing the satellite industry as a unified voice. Next slide, please. And on the basis of having a unified voice, really, what we have is very much a guiding principles in terms of spectrum management. We really do take a holistic approach to spectrum management in terms of the fact that we as a satellite operators see ourselves very much part of the evolution in terms of the development that takes place on ground as well as in space. And we're very much part of the 5G ecosystem. And regulators, we encourage regulators and administrations to take a very much a holistic view of the technologies that are capable of supporting the 5G ecosystem, particularly to serve all the citizens nationwide with connectivity and so on. We see clearly growth of users in APAC region substantially over the years, particularly with substantial mobile systems, fixed services, spectrum that's already been allocated for IMT across the various bands. But however, we also are concerned if there is any premature identification of spectrum, particularly from existing usage, particularly satellite usages, whether it's broadcasting or fixed satellite services or mobile satellite services. Clearly, if that was to happen, then that would certainly impact the current existing services provided by both BSS, FSS, and MSS. There are many mid-band satellites that are operational, over 80-odd satellites that serve the APAC region. They're very much embedded as part of the national infrastructure in many countries in the region. And they've been in service, as I say, over the last 20-odd years. They continue to grow and add to the growth of the GDP nationally for many of the Asia-Pacific economies. Finally, to demonstrate use of available spectrum, we encourage regulators to identify, allocate, deliver new spectrum to mobile network operators. But however, you need to bear in mind that any additional spectrum you allocate needs to be carefully balanced against the existing users and existing usage and so on. Next slide, please. We see here in the discussions on the WRC 2023 conference, there are some critical agenda items such as 1.2, which basically carries a number of bands for possible identification for IMT, ranging from 5 in the 6 gigahertz in particular, from 5925 to 6425 up to 7125. That particular band, there are other bands as well, KU band and so on. Basically, these bands have got existing utilizations, and you can see some of those utilizations and current services are critical of nature. They also include particularly the Appendix 30B in the uplink direction in the 6 gigahertz, which is basically allowing developing countries to have equitable access to the FSS satellite services with the national allotment or assignment, whatever. In addition, of course, many countries in the region are considering the use of up to 6, as they have done already for the lower 6 gigahertz, for Wi-Fi and LAN applications and so on. So given the planned and unplanned services that you have here with satellites as well, it's worthy of looking at it and having a very careful look at the studies that are being done. Similarly on 1.3 as well, which is a sensitive issue, given that there's a lot of investment that has gone in by many of the satellite operators in the C-band, in particular from 3.6 to 4.2. The conversion from going from secondary to primary could impact and could damage the kind of growing economies, particularly for GDPs in some of the larger economies in the Asia-Pacific region. Next slide, please. You can see here in terms of how much spectrum is it really needed for IMT, and really there are alternatives. The 6 gigahertz is a very sensitive band, particularly with the utilization that you have here, as I mentioned already, for a number of services, FSS and so on. And really, when we look at Asia-Pacific region, you can see the number of MNOs and the amount of mid-band spectrum that have been identified. So Hong Kong, for example, with 200 megahertz allocated to 4 MNOs. India, again, 200 megahertz for 4 MNOs. Singapore as well. So really, how much spectrum is really needed, one begs the question. And also how much spectrum is also underutilized. There is refarming of spectrum that can happen as well from 2G and 3G, which can be adopted as well. So I think we need to be very mindful and balance exactly what new spectrum as against what existing spectrum is available for IMT services. Next slide, please. And similarly here, I think we have to be, again, careful in the way that the C-band, particularly mid-band spectrum, is actually utilized. In the other economies, such as the more developed, like US and Europe and so on, Japan, Korea, you have B2B, business-to-business applications with some gateways which have guard bands, large teleports and gateway stations, limiting the number of earth stations that are needed to provide satellite services. This limited number has made it possible to refarm the C-band spectrum for terrestrial mobile services. However, that situation is not the case in the case of Asia-Pacific. Number of earth stations and business-to-consumer locations is significantly higher. In the Asia-Pacific, there are millions of ubiquitous deployments which provide direct-to-home services, and it would be near impossible task to expect co-frequency usage between the FSS earth stations and the IMT deployment. So we need to bear that in mind, that we are very much different, particularly in the developing part of the world, whether it's Americas, Africa, and Asia-Pacific developing economies. Thank you. Next slide, please. This is just showing you in the 6 gigahertz, when we look at the unplanned band from 5925 to 6425 and 6425 to 7125. There is unplanned band where frequencies are used, which provide basically safety services, safety information. So when you have vessels, this is a map of where vessels in the Asia-Pacific region are in distress. This is a last year statistics. And these statistics basically show that when vessel is in distress, they send out an alert. And then that alert information is then forwarded through using the uplink in the C-band in the 6 gigahertz to the other vessels in the vicinity of the vessel in distress. And that is basically providing safety line, if you like, rescue operations for that vessel in distress. So we see a very large volume of traffic in distress, quite honestly, in a very busy sea lanes in the Asia-Pacific region. What we were doing is taking away the right to save lives and provide information, safety information to those vessel owners, which can actually rescue that whichever vessel is in distress. And this is equally applicable also to aeronautical, but this is much more apparent because we have a global maritime distress and safety services, which we monitor and track globally. And this is the kind of data we have here. Next slide, please. The other consideration clearly is the number of countries, and including those in Asia Pacific increasingly now, are looking at both lower 6 and the upper 6 for Wi-Fi RLANs connectivity. And the reason behind that largely is the fact that they see the value of what they have today in terms of satellite services, coupled with the Wi-Fi in the upper six, lower and upper six, marries together very well and effectively provides, maximizes the socioeconomic benefit to the country. When we look at satellites and the Wi-Fi, both with low power or very low power devices, then they serve quite effectively in serving the economies and providing a very maximizing the GDP, if you like, and the growth in the economies with the kind of services and the population that you have here today. And I think it's worth looking at that because a number of countries, as you can see globally around the world, have now gone and opted for the full use of the unlicensed band from 5925 all the way up to 7125, allowing some 1200 megahertz of spectrum available for unlicensed use and for Wi-Fi, which ties in well with the satellite services. Next slide, please. The satellite services, as you can see here, we see the satellite as being a very critical component of the 5G ecosystem. And that is very much the case when we look at the kind of applications, whether we're looking at dense urban environment with DTH kind of applications and services, to suburban to rural environment, whether we're looking at mobile environment or fixed and so on. So the new generation and new wave of very high throughput satellites that are coming in and are available with services, as you heard earlier, will offer much greater level of affordability and coverage, and as well as capacity and bandwidth. So it is important to safeguard and to bear in mind that satellite is there to complement the rollout of 5G and to expand the kind of services nationally. Next slide, please. So what we ask for the administrations is very much really that you consider all options for improving connectivity. More mobile spectrum is not necessarily the answer. I think there are various other options that are available, refarming of 2G and 3G spectrum, sharing spectrum among the MNOs as well, and using, at the last conference, we allocated almost 17.25 gigahertz of millimetric wave bands, including the 26 gigahertz, which has 3.25 globally harmonized spectrum available. So again, utilization of these bands are very important to maximize, to serve dense urban communities, as you're doing that in Europe, North America, China, with millimetric wave for high-speed 5G services. And then you have other, as you say, other bands that are alternative bands that are available. So we don't have to actually have 5G in the 6 gigahertz band at all. So there are alternatives, and we can have a win-win situation, and we can roll out 5G services for the country as a whole, complementing what there is already in terms of satellite services. My final slide, please. So going back to the status, I did a color coding of the various various agenda items we have for the WRC23. There are 4 agenda items which protect satellite bands from other services, and clearly that are important to us because of the kind of levels of investment, billions of dollars worth of investment that the satellite operators have put into it, not just in Asia Pacific, but on a global basis. There are regional and global satellite services there. Enhance the use of existing satellite bands, develop new satellite bands, and the WRC27 agenda item. So the color coding, really green means the work is well underway. There are a number of studies that have been presented also in the various working parties in the study groups, whether it's study group 4 or 5. And also methods are beginning to be identified. That's amber. We're yellow, I'm afraid. I didn't get an orange color. And the CPM text is also under development for many of these agenda items. So basically where we are now, and I think we heard Mario talk about, increasing the productivity. And I think this is the time, this probably year is where most of these methods and CPM text will turn into green, hopefully by the end of the year, before in time for the CPM next year. So given the complexity of many of the issues, and also too many bands are being considered, particularly in some cases, obviously it has taken a little bit more time in order for us to get on with the study work, if you like, and that means agreeing the parameters, the assumptions, and so on between the different working groups, study parties, and so on, and then getting the results from these studies, and then really analyzing that results and coming up with methods to protect and to move forward, and to develop the CEPM text. So these are all coming together nicely, and hopefully we can accelerate in terms of some of the work that's required in some of the more critical agenda items. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Bashir, for your introductory presentation. So let's continue now with Joe, that will give us a perspective of the mobile industry. Joe, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mario, and good day to you all. First of all, thanks Forum Global for inviting the GSMA to join this event. Dan, it's great to see you, and also in the previous sessions, it was very good to see many of my good friends. Unfortunately, I couldn't be there myself in person, but I definitely hope to be able to join you at the next meeting in person. What I'm going to share, I can't see my slides. You can put it up. We talk a lot about connectivity, and it's actually very nice to see Mr. Patel speaking a lot about IMT in the satellite slides. I want to talk about some mobile, and we spend a lot of time, a lot of efforts on including faster speed, higher capacity. But I think we also need to think about how we can provide more inclusive connectivity and how to make sure more and more people will be able to use mobile, to be able to use connectivity to better improve their lives and also to better improve their work as well. There are lots of questions around, and there was also a comment about whether mobile is the answer. I think back to basics a bit. I think from our perspective, we look at more who is asking the question, and the parts that we are seeing is that it's not really a mobile industry trying to force our customers that you have to buy a new SIM card. 2 is not enough. You have to buy 3. More and more, we're seeing our customers, they want to use faster mobile connectivity. And for many parts of Asia, mobile connectivity is actually the main source of connecting to the internet, if not the only way. We've seen that in many markets in Asia, and providing inclusive and high quality mobile connectivity has been a key component and a key enabler for many of the people, in particular during the COVID pandemic, to be able to stay connected, to be able to carry on with their lives and carry on with their work. So WRC will be a very, very important occasion for the mobile industry to be able to continue to improve our services and also to continue to expand inclusiveness of the mobile networks. So this is an overview slide of all of the agenda items relating to IMT. So the first point I want to highlight is that all of those bands are important. Our customers are demanding much higher quality mobile connectivity, and they want connectivity to be everywhere, anytime. Our customers are now in a culture of wanting everything here and now. They don't want to be waiting. They don't like to see loading signs. They hate that. And whenever they see their mobile bars on their phones dropping from 5G to 4G or from 4G to 3G, they get very, very upset and then call our members customer service and questioning why the service has been dropped. So our customers are demanding those services. Our customers are demanding high quality and greater coverage. And all those bands will be important. But if you look at those bands a bit more carefully, then you will see mid bands stand out. In particular for Asia, that's pretty much all we have. So the mid bands will be a key bands portions for this WRC for the mobile industry globally, which naturally translate to be also important for customers globally as well. So for the next slide, I want to look a bit more on what kind of impact we have. So mid bands in particular, in our latest research at the start of this year, looked at the GDP contributions across the regions. APAC is one of the sort of the leading regions that will benefit the most from more availability of mid-band spectrum for IMT. You can see that's about 0.5% of the regional GDP. 0.5% may not look big, but if I put that into perspective and into context, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, updated their global economic outlook in April, and the growth outlook globally for the economy GDP is 3.6%. So we're only looking at 3.6% globally for economic growth, and with that kind of growth, 0.5% from the mid bands, that is an enormous number, and that is an enormous driver for economic growth, and in particularly as we societies and business start to recover from COVID, we reopen, we reconnect with our big businesses, we can reconnect with our customers. Mobile connectivity, in particularly mid-bands for Asia, will be one of the key factors and one of the key enablers to sustain that growth. And if we move on to the next slide. So looking at that vast amount of GDP contribution to the regional and the global economy, so what do we need as an industry? Because spectrum for mobile sector is the sort of the fundamentals and is the basic enabler. Without airwaves, without spectrum, none of your phones will work. We'll be back to dial-ups. We'll be back to cables. So for the mid-bands, our research showed that we need an average of 2 gigahertz of mid-band spectrum globally. And if we look at on the bar chart to the left, is that for regional hubs, places like Hong Kong, places like Tokyo, like Bangkok, where some of you are at the moment, those regional hubs will be the main engines for economic growth and recovery for their respective countries, and also for the region as well. For those places in particular, they need more mid-band spectrum to be able to carry out growth, to be able to sustain growth, and to be able to recover. If we don't have those spectrum in the mid-bands, and if we fall short of that, we have a much higher risk that economic will be delayed, economic growth will be hampered, and the cost of deployment will be far more expensive. And that also translates to less inclusiveness for customers, for businesses. If we move on to the next slide. So at the WRC, what are the opportunities and what are the opportunities for us, both industry, governments, and many stakeholders, and what can we do about it? So globally, sub-1 gigahertz is a key band. That's a prime band for coverage. And I'm really happy that in Asia, we're taking new initiatives to develop the APT 600 band plan. And that's a great effort that are supported by many industry stakeholders in the region and globally, and also by some leading administrations as well. And this really sort of brings my memory back in, might have been 10 years ago now, when we did the 700, the APT 700 band plan. That was a huge success. I think no one can question that. It became a global harmonized spectrum using 700 bands that become a major driver behind coverage. So that's for region 1. Of course, we don't have an agenda item in region 3, but still, I think the momentum here in the APT on the APT 600 will have implications globally and will be a new driver for the regional growth in Asia. And we have the C-band. C-band has been hugely successful as well. We have seen huge deployments in China and elsewhere, and it has become the most deployed 5G spectrum in the region and perhaps also globally. And many of our 5G phones, whether you are in Bangkok, whether you are in Singapore, whether in Hong Kong, in China, your phone very likely will be connecting to the C-band to access the high-quality 5G capabilities. But there's still room to get more. There's still room to improve the 5G networks on the C-band capabilities. And I think it's important that we continue to explore those opportunities. And the 499 is one of the bands that we're looking at in Region 3 for WRC. Some administrations are already starting to use that band. It's part of the mid band again, so that would be a good addition to the availability of spectrum that our industry hopes to have for their networks. And because some administrations are already deploying that band, handset deployments, handset availability, and handset support is already here. And as more countries start to use the band, scale will drive down cost of the devices much more quickly. And then the 6 GHz. Some say it's controversial, some say it's sensitive, but to me, if I put all those things aside, if you look at, again, down to the basics, who is asking the question and how we're answering the questions. 6 GHz band will be a key band that for our industry to be able to continue to be able to provide high quality mobile connectivity that is both good in terms of throughput and capacity, and also for coverage improvements as well. And that will be a critical band for us to ride down the good momentum of the initial deployments of 5G and the next few years to be able to satisfy increasing demand of our customers. Because at the end of the day, we're not creating demands out of thin air. That's not how we do things. We look at our customers' requirements, their needs, and 6 GHz will form a major part of our solution to be able to respond to their demand and requirements. So I think I have my final slide. My final slide is my email address. So do get in touch. We're very happy to speak to you, and we're happy to see how the mobile industry can support you and work together to move forward. Thank you. Back to you, Mario.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks very much. So we'll finish this first round of introductory presentations with Elena, who will bring us the perspective of the broadcasting industry. Elena, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mario, and good day to everybody. And thank you to Forum Global to invite me to be here with you in this important session. So my presentation will focus on agenda item 1.5, and if we are on track with the preparations, this is a key agenda item for us, for broadcasters, but I have to say that there are also other agenda items, but Bashir has already mentioned these agenda items that relate to satellite, which is also an important distribution platform for us. So next slide, please. The EBU is the world's leading alliance of public service media. We represent public service broadcasters, and we have 130 member organizations across 56 countries. We also have not only the European broadcasting area, but we have also associated members across the world and many in Asia. So next slide, please. So this agenda item is really on Region 1, focus on Region 1, but I think it's also important for Region 3. And it focuses on the future of the UHF band. What needs to be done in this agenda item? So 3 main things. The first thing is to study the current spectrum use and the spectrum needs for the services that are using the band 470 to 960 megahertz, the sub 100 gigahertz band. The second item that we need to do is to investigate if this band, but only part of the band 470 to 694 megahertz, can be shared between the existing services and the new candidate services. And finally, to see, in function of the results of the studies, if we can do some potential changes to the radio regulations. So in the CPM1, it was created a task group 6.1, and it's shared by Sergei Pastuk. And this task group is responsible for these 3 types of studies. We had 4 online meetings so far, and we have 1 more that will be held in September this year. Will be the last one to prepare the final text. Next slide, please. So just to give you an idea very briefly without going to the detail of how this band, the 470 to 960 megahertz, is used in region 1. So we have the first main use of the band is by the broadcasting service. There is a primary allocation in the whole range. However, the band is used by DTT. There was a Geneva 6 agreement that planned for DTT between 470 to 862 megahertz. However, now the use in most of region 1 is limited to the lower part, 470 to 694 megahertz. The second main use is the mobile use. The mobile use, they have a primary allocation in the upper part of the band between 694 to 960. Here they have the 900 megahertz band that is used for the GSM, the first generation of mobile services. We have the 800 megahertz, which was the first digital dividend in region 1, and the 700 megahertz band, which was the second digital dividend in region 1. We also have some mobile military services. We also have some audio PMSC under the mobile side. And below 695 megahertz, there is only an allocation, secondary allocation to some applications like audio PMSC. There are other uses like the radio astronomy in some frequencies. We also have some radio allocations, and this is on a country-by-country basis. And we have some other allocations like the mobile satellite or aeronautical radio navigation with very small usage. Next, please. But we have to take into account that the studies on the use will take care of all this frequency range, but the sharing studies and regulatory actions will only be done in the lower part of the band. If we can see that, if you click on the next in the next slide, please. I hope it will work. Exactly. So at this agenda item, any possible regulatory actions will only look to the lower part of the band. Next slide, please. So if we go first, how we are going with the studies. As I mentioned, the first studies is on the use of the spectrum and the amount of the spectrum that the services will need for the future. Here in this slide, we see the studies for DTT, digital terrestrial television, in the future. Working Party 6A made a questionnaire, a survey that sent to all the administrations in Region 1, asking what will be their future spectrum needs for DTT in the future. We can see that there were 106 replies from administrations. 85 of them, they say, we need all this spectrum for DTT, all the remaining spectrum, which is the 224 megahertz that is remaining for DTT. We see that 10 administrations, they say we need even more than that. It's not enough. We need to expand the use of DTT. And only 7 administrations, they say, oh, we may need a bit less than the 224 megahertz. So this was a clear reply from most administrations in Region 1 supporting the need of the spectrum for DTT. Next slide, please. So that was the spectrum used for DTT. But what about for other services? Well, the mobile service, in that case, Working Party 5D, 5A and 5C, they sent different surveys also to administrations asking not only what the current spectrum use, but the needs for the future. Only 20 administrations provided a reply to this questionnaire. A few, they say that they need some additional spectrum for IMT, but there were different replies with different amount of spectrum below 694 that was required, going up to 120 megahertz. And also some administrations, they say that they have a different time frame for access to this spectrum. A few, they say, we do not require more spectrum for IMT. There is no clear need at this time, but would support a co-primary allocation because to mobile services, because this would give us some opportunities for PPDR, public protection disaster relief services, and for some military services. And they all confirm that the spectrum needs for GSMA, for PMSC, that is wireless microphones, is still needed. Radio astronomy service, they say that current spectrum is still needed, but they don't need more. The same for the radio location service. Current spectrum is needed, but no request for more. And also very important to note is that the current spectrum use, as a conclusion, changes a lot across Region 1. different countries have different uses and for all the services. Also, another important conclusion to note that there was no requirement from any country to say, okay, we want to reduce the spectrum allocation for any of the existing services. Nobody said we want to reduce. So, and some countries, they say we need more for certain applications. So in conclusion, if we need more allocations, there is a need to study if different services can share the spectrum or not. Next slide, please. And here we go to the second task to be done under this agenda item. This is the sharing studies. We have done co-channel and adjacent channel studies between different services. This takes into account the new candidate services, IMT, PPDR, and mobile military mobile services into the existing services, into incumbent services, DTT, PMSC, radio astronomy, and radio allocation, always in the lower part of the band, and the other way around, the incumbent services into the new candidate services. However, there are 3 administrations that are opposing to consider secondary services in any of the studies, and also they are opposing the consideration of the sharing studies from existing services to new candidate services. They say this is not needed, it's the problem of the new candidate services to see how they can share. To note that the results of the sharing studies show that IMT is not possible to share everywhere with the existing services due to the large separation distances that are required, that could go from 100 to 300 kilometers for the case of IMT sharing with DTT. These results are confirmed with real interference cases. We have difficulties to understand the assumptions of and methodologies that used by certain studies that they show shorter separation distances. The assumptions and methodologies are not disclosed, they are not shown, and therefore it is not clear for us to understand how the results have been met and what they represent. There is a correspondence group that was created in February 2022 to progress on the pending issues. And finally, the third study that we need to do in the next slide, please, is to study the regulatory solutions, the methods. In the next slide, please. So we can see that many sections in the CPM text are still to be developed in the square brackets or listing different views. Regarding the regulatory methods, they are listed, but there's still to be discussed everything. There are changes. There are the methods like no change or no change with review in a future WRC. There is methods with co-primary to mobile, but many different options could be with identification for IMT or without identification for IMT. Could be in the table of allocations or in a country footnote, could be with conditions, valid at a certain date, only downlink, etc., etc. Could be a secondary allocation. So still a lot of work to be done. Just to finalize in the next slide is to say the importance of this band, the UHF band for broadcasting service. Please, in the next slide, please. Exactly. This band is crucial for media. It's for public service media that will represent, it provides near universal coverage, free to air, resilience in time of crisis, and is efficient to deliver media content to mass audiences. It provides prominence, we have no gatekeepers, etc. So important to remember that DTT and audio PMSC rely on the UHF band, and in particular in this frequency range, which is the only UHF spectrum that remains for these services. LTE-based 5G broadcast terrestrial services is something as a new technology we are developing and will complement the existing usage, but will not replace DTT. And regarding PMSC, there are a lot of studies to be done, but so far 5G cannot replace audio PMSC. This system, the LTE-based 5G broadcast terrestrial systems, can provide a broadcasting service. It's a one-to-many service, and it's compatible technically with DTT and PMSC, and we can introduce it in UHF band with the Geneva 6 in region 1 without any changes. The co-primary allocation to mobile services is not flexibility, as DTT and mobile services cannot coexist, is one or the other. Innovation and flexibility in the UHF band can be introduced without any changes in the ITU regulations, and we as the European Broadcasting Union, as well as the African Broadcasting Union, the Arab States Broadcasting Union, the World Broadcasting Union, and also the European Broadcast Network Operators in Region 1, we support no change position in this agenda item, because this band is crucial for the future of media. Thank you very much, Mario, and thank you for all to listening.
Thank you, Elena. So we'll go to the questions and answered part of this session now. So let me go to a first round of questions to all of you that I will be asking, and then we'll go to the questions from the participants. So let's go in the same order that you spoke. So I'll start with KJ. So KJ, you said that the APG was working on modifying its working methods in order to react to the WRC discussion actively and timely. Could you please tell us more about this initiative and what is being addressed?
Thank you, Mario, questioning us. Normally during the WRC APG as a plenary level, we meet almost every day. However, it would not efficient, and some agenda item is very dynamically discussed. So we allow the small groups decisions, and then with that group react to the WRC discussions formally. So it gives us some flexibility, and then react to timely to the discussions with the regional group, and also formal meeting of the WRC. So that is what we are thinking right now.
Okay, thank you, KJ. So Bashir, you've mentioned all the agenda items that deal with the satellite services, but which are those that are been more challenging from GSOA's perspective?
Thank you very much, Mario. I think clearly where we have agenda items which are looking at the identification of additional spectrum which is being taken away from satellite services, particularly in terms of agenda item 1.2, we find that, quite honestly, that there is some critical services in the unplanned band, which I mentioned as part of my presentation. And also, I think there is the Appendix 30B band, where we have 300 megahertz allocated for the developing countries. These are critical elements which requires very careful studies to be done in terms of whether IMT is feasible or not, given these services and so on. And I think one of the aspects is that we've looked at studies where we've done studies, but even though the working parties have provided in terms of the parameters and the assumptions for these studies, it's been open to interpretation by various different parties, of course. And this results in studies not coming out in a most effective way, more balanced way, if you like, and more representative of the reality of the situation. And that is unfortunate. So there are some challenges here, particularly items such as 1.2 and so on. But anyway, I think we're all coming together. We're trying to harmonize a bit more, trying to look at the differences in the study results, and trying to converge to the extent that we can actually put together some methods and draw CPM texts. Thanks.
Thanks, Bashir. So, Joe, I won't make you my own question, but one from the audience that I got already. By the way, I'm getting the questions from the virtual participants so that I can ask them to the panelists. But if some of the physically present participants want to ask a question, they are most welcome. Please raise your hands, and the organizers will let me know. So, Joe, this is a question from Roger Bunch, who is participating remotely. He says, you mentioned the APT 700 megahertz band was a success. Do you believe that one of the success factors was its completeness and credibility with comprehensive sharing studies, which could be applied globally?
Thanks, Mario. Thanks, Roger, for the question. It's been a while. I think completeness and credibility of sharing studies, of course, one aspect. At the mobile industry, we care very much to ensure protection to other licensed services, particularly in the adjacent bands. But I think more importantly, I think probably the more important driver and the reason for the success is actually harmonization and the scale. Because sharing studies or all of those preparation work are important, but at the end of the day, we need to get devices, affordable devices and affordable services to the hand of our customers, to more people, both retail and also business customers. It's because the people who are using it actively, people who are able to afford those services and devices, that has made APT 700 a huge success. And Asia, being so wide and so diverse, and the scale we have is enormous. And that scale has been proven at the APT 700 band that we can create something that is very valuable for the global economy. The 600 bands, the 6 GHz bands, these are the new opportunities that we have to repeat the success they have achieved in Asia as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Elena, I would ask you why broadcasters do not support flexibility in the UHF band.
Thank you, Mario. Well, we have to understand what we mean by flexibility. Many European administrations, they call flexibility to add a co-primary allocation in VHF band with broadcasting services. We don't think this flexibility, because we know from the experience with the 800 MHz band and the 700 MHz band that both services cannot coexist. DTT and IMT cannot coexist in the same spectrum. We had interferences. Mainly the weakest case is the mobile base stations, because they get interfered by DTT in the reception of the uplink from the mobile phones. So we had many interference between neighboring countries. We have to remember that in Europe, we have many countries that are small, so it's very difficult to control the interferences. And the consequence was that if one country wanted to start IMT 4G, for example, in the 700 MHz band, the neighboring country had to stop DTT because the interference to IMT. So adding this doesn't give any flexibility in Europe, because all countries have to go in one go to IMT, and they cannot maintain DTT in one European country and IMT in the other one. So there is no real flexibility in that sense. In our case, we think that, for example, we have in Region 1, the Geneva 6 agreement. It was a very important ITU agreement that planned Region 1 for digital terrestrial television. And this agreement already itself has a lot of flexibility, because it has different procedures, different articles that provides the administrations to use certain frequency bands for other uses that DTT, allowing coordination between neighboring countries. So there is already flexibility in the existing radio regulations, and adding a co-primary allocation for IMT together with DTT, it really does not create flexibility in Europe. It all goes to IMT or all goes to DTT. And the consequences so far has been that DTT had to move away and we had to stop the use of these bands. So this kind of flexibility we don't think is real, and there are other ways to try to find flexibility. Thank you, Mario.
Thanks, Elena. Is there questions from the physically present participants? While I get that reply, I have a very brief questions to you, Joe, that I think you can answer in 3 words. It's a request for clarification. It says, is it true that agenda item 1.3 is an IMT identification agenda item for the band 3600 to 3800 megahertz globally?
Yeah. Thanks, Mario, and thanks for the question. It's anonymous. So first of all, for the WRC, this band is not for Region 3, but I think overall, the momentum is to achieve greater harmonization for the C band. And that goes back to my previous comments that harmonization is the key for scale, and scale is the key for inclusion, and scale is the key for access. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. Elena, I have another question for you from the audience. Do you envisage outcomes of sharing studies undertaken under agenda item 1.5 may need to be considered outside Region 1 for any spectrum reduction in the UHF band as a result of decisions at WRC 23?
Thank you, Mario, and thank you for the question. Well, I think currently the current studies, there are some disputes on the results of the sharing studies. There are many sharing studies that show the large separation distances that are required between IMT and DTT to share the same spectrum. And that corresponds not only with real cases of interference, but also with previous studies, because in other regions, like in Region 2 and Region 3, there is already an allocation to mobile service and identification for IMT by a footnote in a certain country. So their studies were already done in the previous conference, I think it was 2015. So the studies were already done. The current studies seem to confirm similar results. So I'm not sure I will need to do again the same studies. I think we are confirming the same results and the same situation, the same difficulties. At the time, maybe the studies were not done for 5G. We are doing now the studies for 5G, but we are experiencing the same difficulties of sharing between IMT and DTT. And I think it's the same case in other parts of the region. So I think if they repeated the studies, I think the same results might be obtained.
Thank you, Elena.
If I may, Mario, add
Sure.
to Elena, because I have been working with a number of island states in the Pacific, and they have some very severe concern on the implication of the below 1 gigahertz being considered for IMT, given everything that Elena has just pointed out in terms of the results from the various studies and the impact it would have. The island states, as we know, have a very low level of investments available, but they've invested in DTT rollout throughout the islands. And clearly, if any allocation is done to IMT on the bands that we're looking at here, then that would certainly impact their investments, and they can't really afford any of this, in all honesty. So I think we need to be very sensitive to the needs of particularly small island states and some of the less developed economies and so on, where clearly investments in infrastructure is somewhat limited. And it does take time, because that investment they make is for a long term, not for a short term to be replaced by something else. As we all like to see, every 2 or 3 years, we come up with a new G system. We're already looking at 6G now, and 5G hasn't even rolled out yet. So, I think we have to be very mindful. Thank you.
Thanks, Bashir. As I have you there and you haven't received questions from the audience, let me ask you another question. This, let's say, cycle has been very particular, as we said, with the COVID-19 imposing itself for more than half of the cycle. So what lessons do you think we can take forward from it to the next conference, from your perspective? I know you have ideas on that you've shared with me informally.
Well, I think one of the key things which certainly Dr. Wee brought out in his opening presentation on this particular session is that we need to try and limit the number of agenda items for various categories. We need to categorize the agenda items based on actions that are required as guidelines for administrations. We need to perhaps ensure clarity, precision on the wording of the resolutions. There have been some ambiguity in some of the resolutions that we've come across in WRC 19. And we need to remove that. And really, for sharing and compatibility study work that needs to be carried out, we need to avoid or minimize at least the individual interpretations and to avoid confusions or misalignments, because I think some of the study findings we're finding now, particularly in agenda item 1.2, is the way people have interpreted certain parameters and assumptions and basically narrowed the thing down to say, well, there is no impact or that we can coexist. And I think, in all honesty, we have to be very pragmatic. We need to be realistic. and we have to look at it from a realistic point of view in terms of what is really happening, and have various experts come around the tables and look at it very carefully. So I think, to me, we're learning all the time. This is not my first walk or first conference or second conference. My first conference was way back in 1987, where we took 3 months. So I think every successive conference cycles really has helped us to move forward. And I'm very confident that, Mario, under your leadership, that we'll continue seeing improvements even for the next cycle for 2027. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Bashir, for your kind words. I agree with you, and KJ also mentioned it, that the drafting of the agenda items for the following conference is sometimes creating some trouble on how it is interpreted afterwards. The problem is that, as we all know, many of those agenda items that are agreed for the next conference are done at the last minute in the conference, because they are the object of very, let's say, long discussions. And then it's done in the last night in a rush, and that's a problem. So we have to see a way of bringing this forward in the conference so that we can do it carefully, and then the drafting is taken care of so that we avoid this ambiguity afterwards. So we do have a question now from the physically present participants, from Scott Meinheim. So let's give him the floor, please.
Thanks, Mario. I have a question, I suppose, to Joe, but I think also Elena might have an input as well. I think the key thing that we're still struggling with in Asia Pacific is we haven't yet got the first digital dividend in a number of countries in the 700 megahertz. And even those countries that have actually done all the hard work on clearing the band haven't allocated that, and that's a number of countries as well. And yet, what we really should be doing, and I think this is a challenge to everyone in this room and everyone on the call, Europe, Region 1, the Americas, have all done 2 digital dividends from broadcasting. And in our region, we haven't done that. And I suppose it's the challenge that I would put to people here is, let's quickly do the 700 megahertz, and then let's do the hard work to do the second digital dividend in 600 megahertz, because that's then going to drive 5G coverage and better outcomes. And now, I suppose the question to the panel is, how best do we do that? And because we are going to have some interference issues here, and what's the best way that people might, accelerate that process? Because I for one, we haven't done a good job in this particular part of the band.
Thank you, Scott. I think this is more of a comment than a question. But if any panelists want to comment on your comment, they are welcome. Yes, Elena, you certainly agree with it.
Thank you, Mario. Yes and no. I mean, I don't know exactly the situation in Asia. I know that many countries are slow in the deployment of digital terrestrial television. Many of the countries have not done the analog switch off, so I know that the process is slow. And certainly there is a need to speed up this process, because I think DTT brings a lot of things to the society, to the citizens. So I think this is good, but should not be seen as just as a way to release a spectrum. I think digital terrestrial television is important for the people. It's a way for public service media to connect with everybody, connect with people that has no other means to reach information and entertainment and news. Also very important, terrestrial broadcasting in cases of crisis, not only in terms of hurricanes or other types of situations, also during a war. We have seen that in Europe with the case of Ukraine. So broadcasting brings a lot of benefits to the society. Should not only be seen as a way to release a spectrum. Of course, if we can release a spectrum and can be used for mobile services, this is good. but we need to have a more global view and be careful, as it has been mentioned. It's difficult to share the spectrum, so you need to plan that very well. You cannot do that in one island in Asia and do something different in the neighboring island. You need a complete plan to go together and to push together for the deployment of terrestrial television.
Yes, thank you, Elena. I think that all this makes sense if the target band is going to be globally harmonized. So that makes a real difference. If not, why doing all that? I think the 700 megahertz band has been a good example of a good exercise and a useful one, because the broadcasters didn't lose any spectrum. They were just migrated to a different portion by migrating from analog to digital TV, and they were helped by governments mostly to do that, and the population to get the receivers or the boxes in order to get the DTT. So if that is done with that care, I think it's a good thing, because we have more, let's say, harmonized spectrum around the world. Joe, you wanted to say something? Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Mario. And hi, Scott. Thanks for the question or the comment. Good to see you. So I think that brings 2 points to my mind. I think the 700K is definitely a really good showcase of collectively how and what Asia can achieve in driving the global development and growth. I think that's a lesson and the best practice that we're definitely hoping for the 6 GHz band, that Asia collectively can again be the leading champion for the ongoing and sustainable growth of 5G. And the other point is a bit wider. I see as a change and adapt. Mr. Patel mentioned about his first experience, 1987, and I'm sure the world has changed a lot, and the way people do business, the way people live, and even the way we interact have changed a lot. And one of the things that we in the mobile industry have been doing a lot is to look at how consumer behaviors are changing, how economic structures are changing, and how economic drivers and engines are changing. And we, as a major part of the economy and the infrastructure, how do we change our offerings? How do we change our strategies to adapt to those changes and to be able to always be able to meet those new requirements? And for example, in the COVID pandemic, for many of our members, about 1/3 or sometimes even more of their network traffic is on video streaming. People watching Netflix, people watching video contents and broadcast contents. So how people consume, how people do business, how people live, how people carry on their lives have changed, and I'm pretty sure they will continue to change. I think the challenge for not just the mobile industry, but also for satellite, for broadcast, for all the other sector members or sectors, is how we collectively in the industries can work together to adapt to those changes and be able to offer new offerings and offer new solutions to satisfy those new demands. Some demands we know of, or we are already seeing a glimpse of the light already. Some new requirements might not even be apparent, and we just have to be vigilant and to be agile to be able to meet those new demands. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. So we've run out of time, but I would like to take 1 minute only to show a slide that I put together quickly with some takeaways I would like to have from this panel discussion. So yes, please show that. So it's mainly based on the presentation by KJ, but also on what we were saying before, after, let's say. The first thing is to take advantage of in-person meetings, which are now resuming everywhere, not only in ITU, also at the regional level, to exchange informally with other delegates and find common grounds on controversial issues. This is what was so difficult to do virtually, or it was not possible practically to do virtually, but that physically we can do it again. Avoid remaining in the polarized discussions of the past 2 years by accepting to include the various views in the draft CPM text. This is a proposal I made some time ago, and that most of the working party chairs and the main administrations agreed with, that rather than keeping ourselves in discussions about killing views of the others, that we keep the various views and then we advance. In any case, the CPM text is supposed to have various views if that is the case. And that way we will be able to allow the studies to be carried out. And then finally, to focus on the unfinished business to ensure a sound presentation of the WRC 23. So that all the panelists have discussed what they consider is the unfinished business that's yet to be done. So I think that this would be useful takeaways from this panel discussion. I would like to thank all the panelists for being here and actively participating. Also to the participants for their questions, and to Forum Global once again for organizing this event. I was very happy to be here. I hope that next time I'll be in person. And with that, we can end this session. Back to you, Dan.
Thank you very much.
As I mentioned at the start, I know how busy a week this is for you, so we really do appreciate you taking the time both to join us for the presentation this morning and also to expertly as ever moderate that session. So thank you so much. And thank you, of course, as well to Bashir, to Elena, to Joe, and to KJ for their insights and another really interesting session. So thank you all so much. And thank you to everyone here. Thank you to everyone here for your contributions and to our participants online as well. So we're next going to have a break for lunch. So lunch here for everybody here in person is going to be served in the restaurant down on the ground floor. So in a second, I'll invite you all to make your way down there. We're then going to be back after lunch with 3 sessions that are going to be focusing on the mid-band frequencies. So starting off with a session on 3.5 on the C-band, then a session on the 6 gigahertz band, and then a final session looking beyond those 2 bands and looking at other options within the mid-band frequencies. So we're going to have that lunch break now. I did mention at the start of the day about our showcase sessions that we have running. We're actually going to have a showcase session for everybody watching at home. Is going to be available to be starting in just a couple of minutes for you to watch here on the main stage. It's the showcase session that's being hosted by GSMA-I, focusing on the socioeconomic benefits of the 6 gigahertz band. So that's going to be starting here on the main stage in just a couple of minutes for all of you watching from home and participating virtually at the event. Then, as I said, we're going to be back after lunch. We're going to be starting again in about 50 minutes at 1:40 for the first of our afternoon sessions. But for now, thank you all very much. Thank you to our panelists and participants this morning. Please feel free to go and make your way down to lunch now for everyone in the room, and we look forward to seeing everyone back here at 1:40. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Calvin Bahia, and I am a Principal Economist at GSMA Intelligence. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our showcase, where my colleague, Caroline Butler, will present the findings of a recent study that explains how policymakers can carry out a socio-economic cost-benefit analysis for different authorization models in the 6 GHz frequency band, including both licensed and unlicensed options. It also presents the results of applying such an analysis in 12 countries. Next month, we will be publishing an update to the study where a further 12 countries will be added, including 7 markets in the APAC region. We hope you find the study both useful and interesting. Thank you very much.
So firstly, an introduction to the topic. I'm then going to go and give you an overview of the modelling methodology. And then, as Calvin said, a first view of the cost-benefit analysis results and some conclusions. The 6 GHz spectrum band represents the largest remaining block of mid-band spectrum that can be allocated to licensed or unlicensed use. So governments around the world need to make a carefully considered decision as to what the most efficient use of the band is to optimise the socio-economic benefits. To date, countries that have allocated spectrum in this band have taken divergent approaches. Some have assigned the full band to unlicensed use, while others are considering the full band for licensed usage. A third group are allocating the lower part of the band for unlicensed use and considering the upper part for licensed use. So this study carries out a cost-benefit analysis of different assignment options for the 6 GHz spectrum band. We look at expected traffic demand and supply for both 5G and Wi-Fi, whereby supply is partly determined by the amount of spectrum available. If there is a capacity constraint relative to mobile broadband and Wi-Fi traffic demand, this may be alleviated with 6 GHz spectrum and will generate socioeconomic benefits by reducing prices or increasing network quality, or a mix of both. We compare the socioeconomic benefits of 3 scenarios of different allocations of the band. We do this relative to a baseline scenario of unassigned 6 GHz spectrum. Scenario 1 here on this chart, represented by the all blue bar, is all of the 6 GHz band assigned to licensed use. Scenario 2, represented by the red bar, is all of the band assigned to unlicensed use. And then we have scenario 3, which is 500 megahertz of the band assigned to unlicensed use and 700 megahertz of the band to licensed use. The analysis covers the time period up to 2035 and 12 countries with more to follow in phase 2. Looking at the market trends for mobile and fixed broadband, in countries with widespread fixed broadband infrastructure, mobile tends to provide on-the-go connectivity, and Wi-Fi use is common for a significant portion of indoor users. However, in many countries in this study, especially low and middle income countries, the adoption of fixed broadband remains limited. And overall, we find that the optimal assignment policy for the 6 GHz spectrum band depends mainly on the current expected relative adoption of 5G and fixed fibre or cable broadband services in each market, along with the speeds that fixed broadband can offer consumers. So both 5G and Wi-Fi 6 are expected to drive continued increases in traffic. Increased demand will be driven by new users, along with consumers using more devices with more advanced capabilities, as well as using existing devices more. 5G is the latest technology for mobile and has started being deployed in many markets, offering significantly faster speeds than 4G and allowing for high reliability and very low latency. The rollout of Wi-Fi 6 also offers faster speeds and lower latencies than previous generations of Wi-Fi. As usage of both increases, mobile and Wi-Fi will remain complementary technologies. Both 5G and fixed broadband are digital technologies that are widely regarded as general purpose technologies. They drive economic gains because they enable tools and processes for quicker, cheaper, and more convenient production, which improves the productivity of firms and workers. They also lower information search and knowledge costs of consumers and producers, enabling new transactions and improving existing ones. Hence, studies have found a causal link between the adoption of mobile and fixed internet and GDP, and so we can model a socio-economic impact of adoption. I will give an overview of the traffic demand and capacity supply models. So to estimate the impact of assigning additional spectrum for 5G or Wi-Fi, we developed 2 supply and demand models for network capacity for the period between 2021 and 2035, based on current and expected market growth. Here is a flowchart of the 5G traffic demand and capacity supply model. 5G traffic demand is driven by expected 5G adoption, the minimum performance requirements, i.e. 100 megabits per second download speeds and 5 megabits per second upload speeds, Wi-Fi offload, and the share of connected users that are active. We also assume a growth in traffic demand over time to reflect the increased data used by 5G users. 5G capacity supply is driven by the amount of spectrum available, the number of sites deployed, and also spectral efficiencies. We then estimate the number of sites needed to meet traffic demand given the 5G spectral efficiencies for all available spectrum, and based on the 3 scenarios that I gave you an overview of before. So just to recap them, it's either all of the band assigned to 5G, 700 megahertz of the band assigned to 5G, or none of the band. We compared with these scenarios to a scenario where all of the band is available for license use against the scenarios where less spectrum is available, and there are 3 outcomes. Operators do not densify their networks while the capacity increases, which means that traffic demand exceeds the capacity supply and consumers suffer a reduction in quality of service. Or operators densify the network to meet demand, meaning more sites that incur higher costs, or a combination of both. Now looking at the supply and demand model for Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi traffic demand is driven by fixed broadband adoption, in particular fibre to the home or building, and cable adoption, which can provide higher speeds. It's also driven by the adoption of various devices in each household, for example, smartphones, smart home devices, AR, VR, gaming consoles, etc. The performance requirements for each of these devices, the proportion of fixed and cellular traffic that is loaded onto the Wi-Fi network, i.e. the Wi-Fi offload. And we also assume a growth in demand over time, again to reflect increased data use and device adoption by consumers. Wi-Fi capacity supply is driven by the amount of spectrum available and the spectral efficiencies. We compare the Wi-Fi traffic demand and supply capacity over the period of analysis for the 3 scenarios. Again, I gave an overview before, but I'll just remind everyone. So one of these is the 6 gigahertz available for unlicensed use for all of the band assigned to unlicensed use, or 500 megahertz of the band, or 0 megahertz. So out of all these variables, there are some key drivers of benefits from 6 gigahertz spectrum. Firstly, the existing spectrum availability for licensed and unlicensed use. So the existing and future spectrum allocation to licensed mobile use or unlicensed use in other bands other than 6 gigahertz will determine the supply constraints relative to the traffic demand, and therefore the requirement for any additional spectrum from the 6 gigahertz band. Then we look at the utilization of high band spectrum for licensed and unlicensed use. The benefits for unlicensed can also depend on the utilization of available high band spectrum. Utilization of spectrum in the 60 gigahertz band for up to 30% Wi-Fi traffic demand will reduce the amount of traffic demand that is reliant on other spectrum bands and reduce the benefits from allocating 6 gigahertz spectrum. Not using the 60 gigahertz band for unlicensed use would represent an inefficient use of spectrum, and usage of high bands is always assumed for mobile. And we also look at fixed broadband speeds as a key driver. The existing and future fixed broadband infrastructure in a market will determine the maximum speeds achievable over a Wi-Fi connection, and therefore the traffic demand. So these are a first look at the results. Less spectrum assigned to 5G means lower speeds or higher costs. So starting by looking at the chart on the left, with less spectrum, operators could densify networks to meet the 100 megabits per second download speeds requirement for 5G. This means mobile operators would face an average of around 65% higher annual costs to achieve the 100 megabits per second performance without any of the 6 gigahertz band, or 20% higher costs with 700 megahertz of the 6 gigahertz band, compared to an assignment of the full band. Increased costs would have a negative impact on 5G adoption, and densification would also have a negative impact on the environment. Or, looking at the chart on the right, assuming no change in network densification or 5G adoption, 5G download speeds would be reduced to around 50 megabits per second without any of the 6 gigahertz band assigned, or 80 megabits per second with 700 megahertz of the band, both of which are below the 5G performance requirement of 100 megabits per second for download speeds, which could be achieved with the full band. It's worth noting that operators may reach the technical limits of network densification, so this fall in speeds could be unavoidable. So then we consider the question, would assigning less spectrum to unlicensed use create a capacity constraint for Wi-Fi traffic? Starting with the spectrum supply for unlicensed use, the red lines on this chart represent the total spectrum supply for unlicensed use in each scenario included in the analysis. So scenario 1 capacity supply is represented by the dark red line at the bottom there. This is with none of the 6 gigahertz band assigned to unlicensed use. Then scenario 3 capacity supply is the red line in the middle with 500 megahertz of the 6 gigahertz band assigned to unlicensed use. Scenario 2 capacity supply, the pink line at the top, is with all of the 6 gigahertz band assigned to unlicensed use. Then the green lines on this chart represent Wi-Fi traffic demand from 3 illustrative households. Household 1, is the dark green line, is based on 11 connected devices being concurrently used, and this is the maximum number of devices in our study. Household 2, the line in the middle, is based on 6 connected devices being used, which is the average in our study. And Household 3 is based on 3 connected devices being used, which is the minimum in our study. So we can see a range of traffic demand there based on these different assumptions around devices. Now we look at the impact of fibre to the home or cable speed limit assumptions on the existence of a capacity crunch. If fibre to the home or cable speeds reach a maximum of 1 gigabits per second over the period of analysis, which is represented by the dotted line right at the bottom of that chart, then household traffic demand will never surpass the spectrum capacity for Wi-Fi, even without any spectrum from the 6 gigahertz band, so that lowest dark red line for capacity. If maximum fibre to the home or cable speeds reach 10 gigabits over the period of analysis, a capacity crunch without any spectrum assigned to unlicensed use, i.e. scenario 1, depends on the level of household traffic demand. A capacity crunch would happen in around 2029 with the maximum number of devices, for example, or 2033 with the average, and we see no capacity crunch with the minimum number of devices. And there are no capacity crunches if maximum fibre to the home or cable speeds reach 10 gigabits per second, and there is 500 megahertz of the 6 gigahertz band assigned to unlicensed use, i.e. the supply represented by the red line in the middle. So now we look at the results of the cost-benefit analysis, and I'm going to present 4 sets of results for each of the countries with different assumptions around the fibre to the home or cable speed limits and the use of the high band, the 60 gigahertz band for Wi-Fi. So the dot plot here, I'll just give a quick overview of that. It shows the economic impact of the scenarios as a cumulative benefit, so up to 2035, as a percentage of GDP in 2035. The green dots represent the results for scenario 1, i.e. all of the band to licensed use. The red dots represent scenario 2, all of the band to unlicensed use, and the purple is scenario 3, i.e. mixed use of the band. And in the bottom right-hand corner there's another overview of these scenarios. So scenario 1, i.e. all of the band to licensed use, will deliver the largest benefits across all countries. So we can see there on the dot plot that these green-blue dots at the top, if fixed broadband technologies do not provide maximum speeds above 5 gigabits per second, and if the 60 gigahertz band is available for unlicensed use for up to 30% of Wi-Fi traffic. Now looking at a different mix of assumptions, we see that scenario 1, i.e. all of the band to licensed use, will still generally deliver the largest benefits across all the countries if fixed broadband technologies do not provide maximum user speeds above 10 gigabits per second to all users, and if a portion of Wi-Fi traffic is offloaded to the 60 gigahertz band. In some cases, depending on country-specific key drivers that I went over before, scenario 3 will deliver the greatest benefit, 500 megahertz assigned to unlicensed and 700 megahertz assigned to licensed use, although generally it is seen that scenario 1 delivers the greatest benefits. Again, scenario 1 will generally deliver the largest benefits across all countries if fixed broadband technologies do not provide maximum user speeds above 5 gigabits per second, and here we assume that the 60 gigahertz band is not used by Wi-Fi. In some cases, again, depending on country-specific key drivers, scenario 3 will deliver the greatest benefit. Scenario 3 will generally deliver the largest benefits across all countries if fixed broadband technologies do not provide maximum available speeds above 10 gigabits per second, and if the 60 gigahertz band is not used by Wi-Fi where available for unlicensed. Again, in some cases, depending on the key country drivers, scenario 1 delivers the greatest benefit here. Scenario 2, so all of the 6 gigahertz band assigned to unlicensed use, was not found to be the most beneficial allocation with any combination of these different assumptions. So it was either scenario 1, the whole band to licensed use, or scenario 3, the mix of the band assigned that gave the greatest benefits. So overall, we find that the optimal assignment policy mainly depends on the expected adoption of 5G and fixed fibre or cable broadband services in each market, along with the speeds that fixed broadband can offer consumers. Scenario 1, all of the 6 GHz band assigned to licensed use will deliver the largest benefits across all countries if fixed broadband technologies do not provide maximum available speeds above 5 gigabits per second. Scenario 1 will still deliver the largest benefits across most countries if fixed broadband provides maximum use speeds up to 10 gigabits per second and a proportion of Wi-Fi traffic is offloaded to the 60 GHz band. Scenario 3, 700 megahertz assigned to licensed use and 500 megahertz assigned to unlicensed use will deliver the largest benefits if fibre to the home and cable broadband adoption is widespread. They support maximum use speeds of 10 gigabits per second to all users, and the 60 gigahertz band is not utilised by Wi-Fi. Again, scenario 2, so all of the 6 gigahertz band assigned to unlicensed use, was not found to be the most beneficial allocation in any of the considered analyses, i.e. with any combination of these different assumptions.